Do you feel like things have changed? Because I do. In the last sort of, not even 2 years, maybe maybe even the last year, sort of like you guys have been doing your work for a while, and it feels like there's, I've worked with some kind of creators in this space for a while, and it felt kind of like it was happening, like for sure. Suddenly it just kind of click. I don't know. I guess there's a tipping point, and then suddenly brands are ready to really do this and really go there, and consumers are a little bit more aware.
I think that like transparency is something that brands and audiences or customers, consumers, however you want to
viewers, consumers,
audiences, have always like ranted about transparency. And obviously government legislation isn't that good at like pushing things through, but in the age of like social media, now everyone has got a voice, and it means that brands are struggling for a voice, and the individuals have a voice, so they can, if they find out things, then they can share it openly when it comes to sustainability. Like,
there's not like one single channel for comms to the consumer anymore.
Yeah.
But is that ever, I mean, it feels like it's an incredible opportunity right now. Like this is what I feel when I talk to brands about, what choices do they need to start making around sustainability. Obviously kind of the digital fashion has such an opportunity for brands to kind of explore and develop.
Yeah, I feel like lockdown was like obviously a big thing. We launched IDF just before lockdown, like the most serendipitous.
It was right
so it was
you had your baby and your business launching at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
During the pandemic. Easy choice, right?
And we say we birthed IDF, and it's a definite pun about like the fact that I was also birthing a child.
I like that. It's powerful.
And you are real.
Incubated. But me and Catty met on a panel, and we were both talking about, we used the word metaverse, and there was lots of like eye rolling and actually laughter. And then, then the pandemic hit, and everyone was like, what meta? We had like people calling them, so that digital meta space, what is this? And we were like, okay, well, this is the opportunity now to press reset and to actually look at some of the hierarchical systems that exist within the fashion industry, from all the way from the production, into stores, like how it touches the customer and the importance of diversity, inclusion, sustainability. Let's start to rewrite it. Like all the factories had shut. Like what can we do? And it was amazing. We were having like massive conversations, not just with the PR and marketing teams, but like C-suite. And then all of the, as you know, like all of the press were like considering what it meant, this shift, this stop of production. And then we saw it kind of lapse back into shows, and people threw everything at it, spent even more on production, pulled back on digital. The metaverse hype went, but then we've seen people or brands see the audience disdain with this, like that people are actually saying, hold on for a second, were you just playing at giving a fuck, basically? So it's kind of come back again, and now the brand's like, oh my god, we've got to care again. Quick, what do we do? Like we're getting called out. Yeah. Oh god, those people who are buying all our things.
So I suppose like IDF launched around a time when there was like such an invested interest in like wider justice and equality. So it's trying to like maintain that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the reality is like fashion is particular. I think maybe it is or maybe it isn't. I'm not sure. But I think any creative field is a little bit like this in that it's, the people that are sort of holding the power at that moment are usually very reluctant to want to change a fundamental way of doing things because that system has obviously benefited them. That's a macro thing, right? That's not just in fashion, but fashion is it's like a maybe slightly more hierarchical in many ways than a lot of other industries. So just the changing comes about quite slowly, I think. For an industry that's about fashion, I think Nick Knight has always said, what did I kind of say, Nick Knight? But Nick has always said,
you mean the guy who just bought the tomato plant?
That it's actually, I think he makes a really good point. It's not so much the fashion industry, it's like the industry part of the fashion industry. So it's like the commerce and the businessmen and they are businessmen who are kind of gatekeeping some of those.
Conglomerates own the brands, and then they also own the factories. So that production set is very,
hard to break it.
And so, I feel like when it comes to sustainability, it really is like the fashion industry is like, the Titanic heading towards the iceberg. Everyone's still playing on the top deck, as if it's, it's all going to go away. Yeah, totally, like, come on. But I feel as though there is a shift coming because we've got lots of government legislation that is being pushed forward now.
Yeah, especially through the European Union.
Yeah. But meta washing is a really interesting term that's been...
meta? I've never heard that.
Term.
Yeah. And it's one that...
It's a meta wash.
Yeah.
Because in Meta, the company Meta?
As in like metaverse. So like, how you've got greenwashing, it's like using the metaverse to kind of say that you're doing sustainable things, but then you're actually not. So you're just kind of covering what you're doing in real life with the digital stuff.
And that's particularly because right now you see lots of like PR and marketing teams come into companies like ours going, we want to do something, and they get really excited about it, and the C-suite haven't signed it off. So it's kind of like it. So instead of it becoming an actual pivot or an infrastructure change to the company, like we go in with full 360 strategy. So we work again from the production, the manufacture, all the way through to how it hits audiences, and lots of different pathways of how you can use digital to create an infrastructure change. But then it doesn't get pushed up. So now we're trying to have more conversations with those C-suites so that it is about a legacy shift and show that there is a buoyant economy in this new move and this pivot. It isn't just a like all singing or dancing metaverse experience for like a PR marketing moment, but instead it's really about the guts of your company and creating change, which audiences want.
And it opens the door for like more than just sort of like a surface or like aesthetic change. There's fully internal things that just production, like you're saying, production processes and just ways of thinking that Web3 ideologies completely sort of change the approach of thinking of your consumer as an owner of what they buy, rather than just somebody sort of like borrowing the style of your brand or something. No, they're actually now being asked to be part of the story.
So it opens it up to the consumer as well, because like the more the consumer sort of sees these projects and like this, like the long-term success of it, the more they don't think of like the metaverse or like Web3 as like a one-off like kind of play for a brand.
Yeah, like a novelty.
What future potential does this have?
Do you think, though, the consumers are the same? Like, do you think the fashion consumer and the Web3 consumer, or
No. Absolutely not. It's the biggest.
Different. That's the divide, right?
Yeah.
That's the divide. I mean, I don't think it's going to stay that way. I don't think it'll stay that way.
It's like
generational a little bit.
Totally, and it's like the lessons you can learn, the ideologies but from the Web3 space are so important to fashion right now. The idea of collaboration. I mean, Moncler's a great example of that, how they have their rolling creative directors. And I think that is an opportunity in those kind of moments to ask, okay, we're talking about like what is sustainability when it comes to overproduction. If you opened up your creative production to the said audience and asked them to vote and be a part of it, it changes the linguistical gymnastics of how they understand, or the hierarchy, how they understand themselves to be a part of the brand. To Parker's point, not borrowing the aesthetic tone of the brand, but being a part of the actual making and creating. And they're not just a collaborator, but they're sold in, they're part of that. And I mean, Nike's a phenomenal example, bringing Artifact inside the company, so they're able to take all the Web3 risks, bring in a Web3 community, and then pivot all the die-hard Nike audiences. And I think brands have got so much to learn from that.
I think that's
what
right.
we kind of
the successful ones, I mean, do you guys find that they're sort of the brands that are kind of, they get it, they're early adopters? I mean, I'm sure this is a yes. There's always some brands that are just a little bit more willing to take these kind of risks. And then I don't know if it's, again, the fashion industry. I haven't really worked outside of that professionally, but it seems like, if you get one or two and they lead the way, they're this little like lemurs, they're kind of like, oh my God, so there's this follow the leader feeling.
But it's still really confusing. Like, everyone's confused about like what the metaverse is, and
the definitions are all over the place, and it means so much to so many different people.
And that's the power of it, is that it can be whatever you want it to be, and it is just digital layering, really, and it's a digital infrastructure for your company.
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting because it's sort of if we look back in time, and if we sort of had the foresight or hindsight to think just before the beginning of Instagram, or just before the
I'm thinking about the internet, early days of
dot
the
com
internet.
boom and like the World Wide Web. Those conversations that people were having, saying, hey, should we regulate this? Should this be those rules? That's what we're doing now. We're having this conversation because this is sort of the next stage of technology and how we're going to work. It is going to happen. And so why not like actually define the rules and avoid the downfalls and pain points that we've created already that exist now, and we can sort of avoid that. But it's
also funny because everyone's really scared of it. They're like, oh, the metaverse, oh, Web3, it's really scary. It's not for me. It's for like crypto people, and they're not like me. But like everyone forgets that we're like completely embedded in networks every day. Like you use your phone, you use even a landline, you like look at an electronic billboard, and it's like you're not escaping them if you don't ascribe to Web3.
too late, we're already there.
That's the nature of like technology. Anything new comes up, people are always scared until it gets adopted. Like medicine, like computers, or like telling people that being gay is okay. Like, you know, everything.
Yeah, degrees of familiarity. But I think sometimes with tech evolution, it's, as you said, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because the point in which people start to interact with it, it sort of serves a practical, or helps them with a practical problem. Then I think their tolerance for any of the discomfort or the kind of downsides becomes much higher. So if it actually helps you, okay, let's use Facebook, early days of Facebook, Instagram, if it helps you connect with friends and family that live other places, okay, you might be more okay with the idea of them monitoring your data, right? There's sort of like this trade-off that happens. And so and also, I mean, just so I guess maybe some people in the audience can understand it, I'd love to know kind of more about what you guys do within, just talk about kind of what you focus on, because it will, I guess, will help the audience and me to understand sort of where you're coming from and how you've, I mean, maybe how you started to get interested yourselves too.
I mean, I think with IDF, the biggest thing that we do is like listen, and we effectively educate. It's a really new industry, and there's so many pillars of this new space, and we try to bring that into the fashion industry, and also we work in lifestyle, like we're working with Rolls-Royce brand, for instance, you know. So we've got all these like open discussions that are outside of the fashion industry, but what we really see is a chance to democratize the industry and also give a little back, like going back to that idea of like the hierarchical like scale that exists within the fashion industry. We believe in the creators economy, but we think that you haven't really been. There's a big pain point when it comes to the fashion industry for that side. And for us, it is about like we're launching a platform, which means that you can actually have an equity share in whatever you create, and that goes on forever. And things like that, like these little like points, and if you bring those inside a brand and you say like, okay, we're going to work with you, we're going to listen to see what you currently, let's lay it all down, what are you delivering at the moment that is digital, let's look how we can tweak certain parts and bring those like a constellation of different points together in which the customer can earn more. You can bring creators into your brand. You've got a big grey area which is about sustainability. How can we work on your production side, and how can we then build and kind of map what it means to step into this metaverse or digital landscape?
It's fully 360 degrees.
Quite limitless as well.
Yeah. It sounds kind of crazy because it's like, okay, digital, like, oh, we can open the world, but we can't. like you have a problem, let's figure it out.
It's very exciting.
The solutions are there. It just takes a little bit of sort of figuring out and lining it up. But if a brand can trust somebody like us to come in and actually look at what they're doing, and then also start to and be honest about the pain points that they have and the problems that they're experiencing, there are plenty of ways to fix it.
So are you guys? Are you brand facing? Do you kind of deal with the pitch side of things, or where do you kind of fit into the mix?
Me personally, I'm a creative strategist, so I sort of. I mean, we are.
Big deck down.
So I guess, normally I come on quite early on in a project. I get to hear the brief and work with the clients, and then start to build out the actual strategy along with Leanne and the rest of the team.
Great.
And then, all the way to the end sometimes. It depends on the project. We do a lot of different stuff, so
Yeah.
lots of hats.
Amazing.
Lots of the focus groups as well.
Yeah?
Pockets,
Yeah. So I do, between Agnelle and I, we sort of lead up a lot of the research aspects. So that's internal research for IODF, so we just know what's going on.
Okay.
But also specifically for brands, which is really fun.
Do you think, in that case, sort of knowing that's the focus for you two, do you feel like to your point earlier about having this kind of versatility about what kind of problems you can solve? There's like a wide open gate. How do you see that? What are brands? What are the pain points that they're coming to you with? Because I think that I suspect they might have changed.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of noise right now, and there's a lot sort of going on in the world that people are trying to cut through. But that's also brands are realizing that you can't just be jump on the bandwagon. It can't just be here's an NFT project to make it about digital fashion or anything outside of digital. It's now activations and what brands are trying to communicate have to have some actual stuff to it. Right. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be transparent. It needs to actually be engaging your audience in a way that the audience wants, not what your shareholders want or what you think is cool or something. And also we now know that audiences aren't all the same. Just because you like one brand, that doesn't mean that they all are the exact same people. No. So it's about really going in and saying, let's look at this, let's figure out different aspects of it, the different people who are involved. Maybe we're not going to touch on all of them today, but we can, and we can end up sort of finding the best solutions.
We have lots of software partners as well, so we have lots of things in beta, which is
another American British thing.
I don't know what it is.
So we get to test. Have a nice portal where we can test things before they're out, which is really exciting. And I think that's it. There's so much coming out. We've had right now everyone's talking about AI, and there's so much fundraise around.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask that actually.
Yeah, we use it within so many different parts of the company.
Yeah,
just for,
it's almost like the backbone of a lot of it.
It's not a team member in a way.
Do you think that there's almost this feeling, it's certainly at brand level, that they're like, but AI is coming now. It's almost like an either or. They don't realize that AI is part of
Oh my God, it's so funny.
Mutually exclusive.
AI is a tool though. It's not one or the other. It's something to use, like your internet search engine. It's the team member, not the team.
I mean, I guess the difference is that it's not so visual. It's more about the deep language learning that's happening, but it's still machine learning, regardless of what it's learning. It's more about the language.
I think it's a great leveler as well, because it can aid those people who might have barriers to accessing language for whatever reason. So I think in that way,
it's really important that everyone jumps into it rather than being scared of it, because it's important that the AI kind of out there is informed by different
I couldn't agree more.
Unified.
I do think that's true, even for Web3, is that there is. I think actually Web3's done a pretty good job. Initially, I was like, this is just going to be bros. It's just going to be bros as far as the eye is. To the bros here, but it's not bro. I mean, you know what I mean. I'm talking about Mark Zuckerberg. I don't want the metaverse because we're at this Wild West moment, right, where it's all to play for and it's still being defined, and there's not one metaverse yet. There's a lot of options in terms of how it can be formed. It's being formed as we speak. And I don't want to be on Mark Zuckerberg's. If you're listening,
and I think there's loads of really interesting conversations that are still going on around this idea of the metaverse and how we should kind of almost we don't use the word NFT and we try and avoid metaverse because it is just it's a space. And I think the biggest thing about the metaverse is currently is they are almost dead virtual showrooms with the usability is super low if you compare it to something like Fortnite. What you get from that game and that infrastructure of gaming. And so we haven't seen the alignment with the functionalities and the core rhetoric of what gaming is and why people spend so much time in there. Everyone just I like physical clothes, but I'm working digital fashion because I believe in this industry is going to solve some of the pain points of the fashion industry. I like going to clubs. I definitely wouldn't go to a metaverse club. I want to be in the tactile reality, and I want to be gaining something from these spaces. I think connecting people across the globe, that's a great incentive. exploring each other's like digital assets like in a virtual space. Very interesting. That's a gallery model. And right now the metaverses that you see are very, there isn't, and I think there was so much like fundraise and so much money pumped into it, like of meta real estate, you know, what this all meant for the industry and also for sustainability, right? Everyone was like, okay, we can just build a digital space and we won't have to have bricks and mortar anymore, it'll all be that. And you get in them and you realise, if I don't want to be in them and I work in this arena and, you know, then what is lacking in them? Well, it's actually just some of the tactile fundamentals of humans and human connection, and why people are in the gaming space and not in those is because you can have fun, like game, interaction, is like relationships.
I think there's also like a weird what it is, this digital future of ours. There was this big push, like let's just figure it out now. Let's get it over with. And I think perhaps in some of the rooms of the tech leaders sort of like, okay, they were anticipating that we might get here in 5 to 10 years, but this is an opportunity to just sort of jump the gun.
Yeah.
But then, as Leanne was saying, what's the purpose? It's not there yet. It's not like gaming where we have that sort of association. Think about the lifetime of gaming at the very beginning with like Atari and stuff. Like it took a while for us to really understand and people to actually like onboard to that. It's a very similar sort of situation.
I think the metaverse is still kind of stuck in a period of it feeling quite lame to a lot of people, and it became almost like a meme on the internet.
Yeah, especially in the fashion crowd. And lots of my friends I'd have dinner with and they'd be like, oh, babes, Leanne.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this, all this stuff? It's a couple of pixels. And I'd be like, yeah, well, let's actually talk about some of the...
I think I know who you're talking
exactly. But it is like, okay, but what can it alleviate? And it almost become a bit of a blocker. Digital double, we were talking about this before we arrived, right? Digital doubles and the twins, like currently they're really below par, so you can't substitute one for the other. If there's something that they can deliver, i.e. they can authenticate, if the twin is on blockchain, you can authenticate the physical garment, great. Like you were saying, what is the point? What is the practical? If, you know, a space, what's the importance of this space? What can you do in it in this metaverse space? Well, if it's education, then that's fantastic, because it means that, I mean, as we know, which is why we launched our IRL URL Academy, is because we were brought in to do an hour-long, like, tagged onto a course that's been written 5 years ago, and you're like, okay, let's talk about innovation. And you look at the literature, you're like, okay, right, let's go. I mean, Katy, we're exhausted because we're doing like 10 of these a day because we really do care, and we want more people to understand what the power of this part of the industry is, and not see it as an eye roll, gimmick, PR moment, and see it as a legacy change and a shift. So we launched the Academy because also when we were in those rooms, we were like, hello, this isn't the future. All of you can afford to be here, number one. So let's build another philanthropic arm of the company, which is supporting, you know, so it's much more diverse from an economic background and from a cultural perspective. But metaverses are great for teaching. It means that, especially with augmented reality, which I 100% believe is this vision of the future, it's much more... People don't want to put a thing on their face and disappear somewhere. They want to still be in reality. They want layering. They don't want to avoid reality. And if you can be in a classroom, and to your point, you were saying, Livia, about like language. If you can. Also, people are visual learners. Not everyone has the attention to or the memory to be able to excel in that mode of learning. And so if you can have a much more STEAM narrative when it comes to learning and education, I think that metaverse spaces, that's what they're absolutely perfect for. But also brand exploration.
No, I was going to say, as far as sticking to education, is we were talking about AI earlier, and I think one of the big things that people coming out with AI was that it's like the end of homework, and now that's going to be a whole generation of stupid kids.
Oh no!
But I was like, wait a minute though, because this actually is a really great thing. It's going to now make us understand what education is.
And what we need to be assessing as well.
Yeah, and it's not a memorization. It's not just like, ooh, here's some dates and stuff. No. Now this is actually like real skills. And then this is also sort of goes into the IRL URL Academy of like what is also like a real representation of the community and of people that need to be educated and people who want to be educated and be part of these things. And I think it's, we're sort of at a revolution, I guess, at that point as well, with AI and with the metaverse. It opens up all sorts of new pathways.
It's also about bringing like the imagination back in. Like you've got all of these new channels where you can like be even more creative with like your thinking and how you express something and how you use information, and like that's the important thing, and like how you use these tools rather than it being about what you know and how you came to know it.
How you can vomit it back
Genuine, like critical thinking.
With like creative tools especially, you don't have to like have all those skills and like do hours of research. Like whatever you kind of think of, you can like replicate straight away or play around.
Also, I think it's like the perception of it. If you look at these things like a cheat way out, it will be like that. Will think just like bolster your ideas and that like creative process.
Yeah, we launched our AI as like a team member. And had a real and
I've got one here too. I don't know if we're going to see it later today.
hello.
Go ahead.
No, just saying the reason why we launched it as a team member is exactly that point that Livia was saying. It was like, okay, there's so many discussions around AI and particularly when it came, I think, like sustainability and the creative like teams, what it meant to those. Because digital, we always say there's so many amazing gravity simulating software, so you can see in a second, like within Chloe, for instance, is just one of them on the market. You can see a stiff leatherette, and then click, it's a silk organza. So it means you can make really rapid creative decisions. And then you have Midjourney and the AI tools, those vision image making tools, which just sped it up even more. And I think because we were just teetering with the pushback of digital is this quick tool and everyone's gonna be out of a job, and then you layered it with AI. It was like, oh God. So we were like, right, okay, what can we do with AI to actually open up the conversation with our community of makers, and then with the individuals that are within the fashion industry that are also part of our community and part of our client list. So we launched it as a new team member, but we also asked lots of questions or proposed lots of fundamental questions about AI and the problems with them, particularly around the bias. And to your point, Noor, everyone should be involved because currently they're machine learning models. So the more people that are playing with them from wider backgrounds and cis white male Silicon Valley space, it's going to
the bros.
Yeah, exactly, the bros. So we launched it as a team member, but it took so long. Like obviously, when you do a project, you're like, right, okay, it's going to take this long. It took so much longer because we had to keep retraining the AI, because when we created the models, they just kept spitting out tall, thin, white models, and we were like, oh my God, it's supposed to be quicker. And then we were like, okay, well, let's talk about some of the statistics that exist in the fashion industry right now about the fact that it's still predominantly white individuals.
Because AI is just gathering, it's harvesting.
It's a mirror.
It's there already.
It's a mirror.
I think people have a little bit of a misunderstanding, and maybe we should let's talk about that actually a little bit. Because I think we're assuming that maybe people listening here have a pretty good understanding of what these differences are. It's always like a bit of but could we, let's define it a little bit. Oh look, here he is. This is I don't know if we're gonna see are we gonna see our AI person today?
Yeah, we have a show
later. Okay, you get to see the SHOWstudio
fantastic.
AI fashion critic. He's very sort of, I think it's kind of sexy, I have to say. But I think it's interesting because I do think the industry is still, let's say the fashion industry particularly, a lot of people just don't really understand what these things mean. I know you probably spend a lot of time defining what these things are, but if we're thinking about solving problems in the space, should we maybe have a convo about what those things are?
What AI can do.
Let's assume that there's some CEOs listening to this. And then let's just discuss, what would you say, I guess, in a pitch meeting in the beginning? How do you what are the problems that Web3 can solve for these brands?
I think if you, so it's like, the biggest one is production, and then how and community, and how you build authentic audiences, and how you can earn more from those audiences by bringing them into your brand fundamentally.
Rather than just this sort of outward.
You are the oracle, and you are
Like telling them what they should want.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like it's more reciprocal. They inform what you're doing, and you inform what they're doing.
Just much more democratic.
Yeah.
Potential to be.
And that is the biggest thing, and it's actually bringing authentic voices into that. So the whole influencer space, you know, it was like, okay, let's link with that person because they care about this, let's link with that person. But how about not just linking, but actually supporting and immersing yourself in those communities, and actually, first of all, pulling it back and looking at, because a lot of the time, which is hilarious, you're creating this fantasy, and all of your campaigns, you think you're speaking to a set individual, and the person who buys it is very bloody different. You're like, oh my god, this is so off the mark, because fashion for so long has been about fantasy and aspiration, and how do I achieve that look, and how do I be that person?
Really
and
tall, skinny white woman.
and now they're like, do you know what? I don't want to be that person. I am me.
Yeah.
And I want to wear what I want to wear. But I think what you do is quite cute. Like how, you know, so people are now, rather than wearing one full brand, they're kind of mixing, matching. You know, everyone understands like styling. So they're like, okay, bit of this, bit of that. And it's just totally changed.
Yeah, pre-COVID and post-COVID customer is completely different now. You can't convince them of something, like they will see through you. So it's really, really important to just not like chuck one NFT just because everybody is doing it. You have to like own it and own the whole story.
Give like
and
a
present
meaningful
it.
reason
Yeah.
for why you're stepping into the space.
And it just like it should just fit with your brand DNA as well. Why you're doing it, not just like have as a campaign essentially.
But I think by sort of employing this practice, it really is a practice, by going in and understanding the community, and then also communicating that and establishing these authentic narratives, that allows and gives your brand a lot more power to then actually activate and be more sustainable, to actually be more inclusive, create more belonging within the community. And that's sort of an interesting way, because it's again, you can just say, oh, we are sustainable. Hi. we do this green stuff and we plant some trees. But no, actually, if you go back and you build this understanding of authenticity, and so your consumers understand and expect you to be transparent and trust you to be transparent, then when you do and actually talk about and engage with other topics like sustainability and things, it makes sense, and the consumer learns as well, and they take away into their own personal practices. Okay, maybe I'm going to buy a little bit less, or maybe I'm going to reuse this. Maybe I'm going to, digital does satiate that need for newness. It does sort of create that, I don't need to buy, 15 things off Shein. I'll
Get
just
that little dopamine hit.
do it digitally.
I think the trust thing is really important, and people just don't want to be passive in what they're doing anymore. It's that proper engagement with what they want to believe.
I think like using digital tools as well, like you give access to the customer to like see and visualize like what they kind of want, invite them into the narrative, and then create exactly what they need, rather than like creating like products that no one's ever going to use.
You're so right. Actually, if you take a step back and think about, because I think so much of the onus of like proving this concept is on the people who are in this creator space. But if you think about like what the industry like involves right now, it's crazy how inefficient the system is from the beginning to the end. So everything from the design process, and how like I work with brands on circular strategies, and like there's like, are we talking about the pre-consumer waste? Are we talking about the post-consumer waste? Are we talking about the waste that happens when the clothes are being made? Are we talking about the design waste? Are we talking
about the end of life, when they're shipped?
End of life, like what happens with the finished product that doesn't sell, the damaged product, the return. So there is sort of at every point this kind of shuffling off of, but huge amounts. I'm not listing any brand right now. There's a lot of them. Like metric tons. I think anytime you use the word tons, it's just like, okay, that's a lot. So I think, it's just amazing.
Got some
You totally like upstaged me right there. I see all all of you now. You're like, fair enough. I was going on a little bit, so that's all right. But there's so many, in that sense, there's so many opportunities. And then I also think like, okay, digital passports, right? This is like a new EU, it's coming. I mean, it is coming. Any brand that is, okay, it's not being adopted by the UK yet, but if you're a brand and you're selling in Europe, you're going to have a strategy around digital passports.
And I think it's all of that. It's like, then we, it's how, when it comes to like circularity, like obviously, and a very obvious one is like, how can you get more on the blockchain? Like, it was 15 years ago, I was in Texas actually for the like the tech summit there, and it was just amazing to see. Like, I watched, effectively a twin of a cotton plant being grown, and it knew exactly what the soil needed to be enriched for it to grow more, what level of sunlight, how much CO2 it took, and that was so long ago. And all of the technology has always been there. It's just that the trust of that technology, or the push from government legislation, or the push from the audiences for brands to actually take it into their C-suite and into their production space and actually make it a reality is just a bit of a, and it isn't a round peg in a square hole. It's just the fact that they've made this square hole, It's just like,
I still think though the beating heart of the fashion industry is still in France and Italy, and the basis of the industry, it's really not that long ago that we went from couture, so like literally handmade to your body, which in some ways was like the original NFT, if you want to be really
absolutely, totally,
one exactly to you, very little waste. It was very like. But of course, that wasn't super open and democratic. But then again, people were making their own clothes, so people, it was, and most people understood how a garment was constructed.
Yeah, they would sell the patterns. You could go. I mean, they would sell them to Harrods, but you can also just go into like the Vogue patterns and like go buy it. Do your thing.
Yeah, and SHOWstudio's got the open patterns for a few brands, isn't it? You can go on and create from, and that's what I think. The idea of digital making, like we trying to democratize that so much. So we on our NFTs we actually give over the much like clones. So we did it on our first NFT drop, sold out in 24 minutes. It was like quite an exciting, insane moment, but we were like one of the first to actually like pre-clone, to actually give the whole of the file, so you could use it yourself and
like
actually
open source.
Open
all
source.
The working files, so you could completely like change the color, you can change some of the shapes, but it still kept some of the brand DNA. Yeah.
And in a weird way, all this digital fashion production is bringing back the skills of pattern cutting, because that's essentially what it is, but with there's no gravity, so you can also have fire as a fabric. But it is bringing that back, which is really interesting. Like some of the individuals that we're teaching on the various academy courses, it's like the first time, even though they graduated from said non-named, quite phenomenal universities, haven't actually learned any of the skills of pattern cutting because they've been taught to be visionaries. So it's really interesting how, in a weird way, we're using some of the couture atelier and like some of the old school, modes.
Kind of bringing back some of like the craftsmanship into fashion and having fun with it again, and not just kind of like repeating the same things, like making the same type of like clothes that they sell on ASOS the whole time. And it's the same with like the whole of the digital fashion sphere and like Web3. It's like a chance to do something that's actually new and build something new, build a new infrastructure, and not just like when I was younger, I used to be like, I've just got to like do the same thing that my parents always did, or like build the same kind of things, and you're just fitting into a mold. And it's really exciting that there are all these different pockets, whether it's like the making of the clothes or like the making of the blockchains or something, and they're all completely new, and you get to like build them all yourself and come up with this like new world of things to do.
Yeah. And like I know Leanne mentioned Leanne mentioned like open source and like having things open source, and that's like definitely the backbone of like Web3, coders, like anything like that. So I suppose just another way to share practice and like make sure you're not gatekeeping anything. Like we're always really open about what softwares we use. For example, we don't like anything we amazingly make. We say this is how it's done, to not gatekeep it, to keep it that accessible.
It's all about education in the end.
Yeah.
Like we want to be like educating people of like what it is. There's so much like it's just you're opening up the whole world. It's imagination. You can wear whatever you want. Like you see this dress in Hunger Games and you're like, wow.
I love Hunger Games.
You do it right here, right now. Like you can be that person as well. Like you just don't have to dream about it anymore.
And I think that's the thing, like make is a really big thing for us. Like how can we, you know, what Apple do so well, which is like the seamlessness. Like right now, if you ask, I mean, I was to say that you owns a wallet here, but we were like, yeah. But we do this all the time, like whenever we do panels or, you know, any events or just generally, like we always like, who did you ask this week? Ask a group of people if you have a crypto wallet, if you have a wallet like MetaMask, like what do you... It's still in the low percentages. And we really want to shift that. So we're doing lots of like educational onboarding and actually creating new ways within our platform that you can onboard without having to go through all the painstakingly like quite nervous like architecture of opening a wallet, to make it much more seamless and bring more people into it that can actually, when you're on that platform, to be able to make, because I think that everyone should have the opportunity to be a creative. And the roles now in the industry are shifting so much. Like you see, it was stylists then become creative directors, and then it's kind of like, and now we've got, you know.
Now it's a celebrity creative.
You don't have to
musicians.
Musicians.
We're talking about making, we're talking about craftsmanship, and it's funny because we have this conversation a lot with brands. It's like the craftsmanship of digital, and people don't get it because they think it's like, you know, digital's supposed to make it fast. That's not the case. And it's like we've done projects with couture houses where there's jewels, millions of jewels on a dress that have been hand carved out digitally and placed there. But
over
now
6 months.
Over a very long period. And now we're having that conversation sort of against the backdrop of today's creative directors of traditional fashion, and very few houses now have genuine like design trained pattern making atelier people who are actually in charge of that. It's now very much about the clout and the sort of visuals of it, and that's great, but it's also what we're talking about is the creation of these beautiful clothes. That's why we're all here. We're all obsessed with fashion. It's the one thing that makes us so happy. And it's of course it's about how it's made. Of course it's about how it hangs on you and how it makes you feel. And digital has that power. It's just we're in this sort of weird. It's almost switched. I feel like. If anything, I feel like we have that sort of creators and that real genuine bespokeness in the digital world now. And it's sort of like, oh yes, okay. Oop, here's a logo on a T-shirt.
But I wonder if the cultures, I mean, I do think just talking to you, it feels like they are different cultures. I think, you know, usually these things do change. They're not static. They're not going to stay like that forever. But the kind of, I was going to say the vibe, being California, the feeling, I think, up until now is like, you know, I think the ideal, that's a better word. The ideal, I think, in the industry up till now has been sort of, or it's evolved over time, that you know you have the hand of the great master, the kind of the creative director is the great master, the puppeteer, you know, the kind of holding all the strings, and like, you know, you're buying into a piece of clothing, we you know, fragrance, everything. Somehow there's this kind of grand master of
the world.
Usually they're men, but it's this
effect,
male, this kind of genius buying into this. So I think that it's interesting because it doesn't, you know, what you're talking about, kind of open source. Oh my God! I mean, I'm curious what the brands say, because on some level, in my dealings with them, when I'm talking about sustainable, they all want to basically not share. Do it completely themselves, innovate, get all the credit just themselves. So it's a fundamental culture shift. Also,
it's massive. But if you can share the proven like data points, which means that you're so there's one thing, and actually our platform's a bit of a solution for that, is because it's seen very much as a risk. And if you not that I always go on about the Nike artifact, but it's just a perfect example. They brought artifact into the company, so they were taking all the risks via that acquisition. And brands are very nervous to allow anyone to have the creative hand or it's not like a Barry's boot camp where they want to kind of license it out to anyone. They want to know because the brand's validity, and it's IP exactly. So what we're proposing is part of the infrastructure is our platform is where all those risks are taken. So the brand, effectively, the licensing for the fabrics all goes through one space where it can be explored. It will exist in all these different modes of social media, shareability, wearability. The brands have an equity share of that, and I think that is part of the solution. And then I think we'll see more and more that this kind of those big brands, unless they do have these pivot mechanisms, then that hand of God complex, I just don't think it's to the taste of our current audiences.
Certainly not younger ones.
Yeah.
I think it is generational a little bit.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
I think an older generation still wants that.
It's absolutely generational, but if it's generational, then those people are dying and dead.
Geographical too. I'm not sure. Like I remember when. This really dates me, but I remember when Vogue China was launching, and the team came over when I was still at British Vogue, and they were, they were just trying to explain, Vogue didn't then have much resonance. They had to build that brand with an audience that didn't really grow up with that concept.
Yeah.
And in some ways, they had a lot more freedom because of that, because they were able to recast.
Yeah, totally.
And so I was always fascinated by that. I think they did a brilliant job.
That's why the franchise of Vogue is so interesting, because we've spent some time with nearly every one of the Vogues. We met with
we met at
Vogue
Athens.
Greece. Athens.
Big fan of Greeks.
Yeah, and it's like there's so many different cultural vocabularies that are now allowed to explore what their geographic, aesthetic, and cultural space looks and feels like. And I think that's so powerful. And I think that's it. If you look at the Vogue model, you've got one, Vogue, that the hierarchy was certainly shifted in one geographical space, and now because they have allowed others to be a part of the vocabulary, it means that it's become much more it's how we believe the metaverse is, not like one, but like all these little villages of
they do have one Vogue, but yes,
the
idea that you can tap into that wisdom and the knowledge from a lot of places and a lot of different people,
and they can all exist at the same time, and feed off one another. And I think that just the temperament and the different ways in which they explore who they are via Vogue is so powerful. Yeah,
I agree completely.
I think also just to go back to the idea of not sharing things and wanting to be the only innovator that's doing the thing and getting all the credit, it doesn't really fit the problems that we have in the world now. It's not we have really big problems like sustainability that they're not about ego, they're not about we did this thing, it's really cool, and fundamentally.
Need a close-up of you while you're saying this, just so that brands can really hear this message. I agree with you completely. But I think it's a tough one still, actually. I think the brands that are pushing forward in sustainability and circularity are still very much of that thinking that they're kind of trying to guard their...
But this is why all of the things don't work, because they've got all these different metrics that don't fit together. Then there's no transparency. There's been so many reports in the last 4 years where people have been the numbers are actually wrong. And there's this thing where it's the stats for how much the fashion industry contributes to global carbon input, in one McKinsey thing it's 4%, in the UN thing it's 10%, and that is a massive difference.
It's the code of conduct between there was a code of conduct between the factories and the brands, which now has been abolished. So I think there's going to be so many veils lifted, in which actually, whether you like it or not, you have to make some solutions, and if digital is one of them, then it's a route. We should back to tomato that we should be taking, and you should be exploring, because it's one of many amazing scenarios in which that we can put the people and our planet first, which I think fashion historically doesn't.
No, I do think that's right, and I mean, to your point, I think the lack of clarity is I just don't think brands have been keeping track.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just like, oh.
They don't even know. I
behind.
mean, even the big ones, even the ones where you'd suspect, even when the messaging is pretty good in terms of like what they're talking about, and then when you sit down and you really look at how much waste, whether it's textile waste, finished product, and I'm not saying this to demonize because I think it's just the way that the market has been built, and so most brands have this problem, and the ones that want to engage with it, good for them, like bravo, like fantastic. But I think it shows you how inefficient the system has been up until now. And you talked about transparency, right? When we started this conversation, I just think there's very little of it, and so that I think, to me, in my opinion, that's one of the things that the digital sort of side of fashion can really help with is accounting, tracking, blockchain. Where is the provenance? Where does it come from? Where is it gone? How do we resell? All of those kind of new architectures are going to be powered by the digital.
Yeah.
And it'll become easier as well, like to the point of like how you onboarding for a wallet.
I just wanted to introduce Josh to the table.
Hi Josh.
Hello.
Yes.
Talking about sustainability.
I'll go and get you a fresh glass.
That would be perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so bringing it.
I'm mesmerised by your outfit. I wanted you to do a little turn. That was so cute. I was like,
yeah, I know. I underestimated
coming
what
in.
it was going to be. Like when they were chatting, because I was like, I better get a look, 'cause it's a bit fun, isn't it? But like,
It's hot.
then I was like, yeah, it's a bit hot, but I'll keep it in frame. So.
Well, I'll get you up to speed. So we've been talking about, most of the team here are from the same place.
Okay.
And we're talking about kind of the role of digital and virtual and Web3, which is what these lovely people are working on. How that can sort of help brands become more circular, more sustainable.
Okay, cool.
And that's kind of where you've come in. So perfect timing, because I know you're really focused on that in your own way.
Yeah, I'm looking around. I'm like, do I know anyone? I feel like I recognise your face from somewhere. I've seen you do something in fashion.
She's everywhere.
I think I got it.
Joshua.
Oh my god, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you recognise so many people in the industry, and then I don't get to meet, because so much is digital, which is appropriate for this conversation. And then I end up meeting people like 2 years later, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I know you. I'm not really sure. So what was the question specifically? How it aids?
It's really open. I just say though, so it's not so much a question. We were just talking about some of the bigger challenges around sustainability, particularly for brands kind of almost wanting to own their solutions and not wanting to share. So comparing that to kind of this idea of like open source technology and giving ownership to consumers. I know you develop, your brand is very focused on sustainability. But being maybe a smaller brand, not small, but smaller, you might have, maybe your solutions, I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about those.
I mean, I think what I do is a mixture of a lot of different things, which means some things end up being brilliant, like through and through. I'll have garments that we'll do and custom projects that we'll do that will be brilliant all the way through from every single fabric we use. But then again, sometimes there are silhouettes that I want to achieve that I can't. There are certain fabrics, and I talked about this before I think on here, where there are certain fabrics that you just can't find alternatives to, like crinoline, for example. I love crinoline, it creates such a shape, but you can't really, unless it's either horsehair or polyester, and both kind of have their own problems. So, and also with horsehair, you can't get with one or the other, you can't get a certain amount, and it's just, unless you're ordering enormous amounts of fabric. So, but then again, this is quite a large conversation, which I'm sure we'll get into more and more. But I mean, I delved into a bit of digital fashion, which I'm sure I feel like a lot of you probably.
Yeah, we're from the institute.
Yes, I thought that's very nice because I did because going all the way back to 2020, I did the British Fashion Council's. It was part of the Institute for Positive Fashion. Yes, it was like a showroom sort of situation. It was like a hybrid between a show and showroom. And that was for positive designers. Positive designer exhibition, that's the word I'm looking for. And then from that, I was asked to do Helsinki Fashion Week, which was great. And at that point, we were doing physical, and it was kind of very traditional ways of working. And then obviously we went into the pandemic, so everything changed, which means that I was then one of like a select few designers that were encouraged to do digital. So they partnered us with digital designers that were, I think mine were based in Paris. I still see what they do, but obviously because of the location difference and language barrier, I don't know entirely what I know that they work and have their own disciplines, have their own companies, and they don't exclusively work in fashion. However, for this project, they were brought onto the project. And we created some really nice garments with it. I do see the positives to it, and there are a couple of friends that use digital fashion to produce patterns, and I can see that being an enormous benefit. But also, part of me is a traditionalist. I do like to drape, and I like to be able to do it just by hand. So I'm a 50-50. Yeah, so I'm a 50-50 kind of person when it comes to that sort of thing.
Hybrid.
Yeah, I would say. But I mean, but also, then I was reading a piece in the Business of Fashion this morning, actually, which was a reread from February, which is to do with whether sustainable fashion is elitist. And I mean, I don't think it is my true first off the cuff answer. But then again, when you think about digital fashion, that software is extortionate. It's so expensive to get your hands on, or you get your hands on it through university and then, or through some sort of sponsorship, and that's time limited. And then when you go into the real world, how do you use that software? And you kind of need to scale a business before you have the money to be able to afford the software.
Yeah, so that's like one of the points, because we basically have a philanthropic arm, so we open up, so we have an academy, so we try and and also first of all, we don't negate the physical world. Like all of our clients and friends and partners are in the fashion industry and are makers, and we don't negate that need and want and drive and necessity of toile and feeling it on the form and the physical. It's like how part of the infrastructure you can tweak certain parts to and create valid opportunity to use digital within it. So it's going like, here's the toolbox, here's the menu, here's some things. Yeah, exactly. And I suppose the same way you work out what is sustainable and how you're practicing sustainably. How do I know the CO2 for this if I'm making it in my shoes?
There's so much pressure on young brands to be perfect, which I think is partly fine because it gets conversations going, and people then you need someone to say, hey, you're doing this right, before you start thinking, am I doing this right? But then again, we don't put that same pressure on enormous corporations.
Well, that's the biggest thing.
And therefore, we're kind of setting up young brands to fail because they're too scared of being wrong. Because we also live in this awful world of cancel culture where you do one thing wrong and your entire brand is ruined. Yeah. So because someone's exploited it and then it gets reposted on Twitter and Tumblr and Reddit, and you've then lost control of your narrative. And then you haven't got a PR company because you can't afford PR. So then how do you tell people that you actually are trying? So it's a whole shit show, for lack of a better.
And I think instinctively, so many designers, I remember when the BFC first, we were talking about the positive fashion, etc. And I think it was like Kate and Price and Liam Hodges were just like, by the way, I found all this fabric. By the way, I'm using fabric I found because this is the situation I'm in, fundamentally. So instinctively, we're producing sustainably because this is all we've got right now. Yeah. And particularly when Brexit hit as well, it was like designers didn't know how to price up because you didn't know where you were selling, what that was. You didn't know the minimums you could get on a roll for fabric.
That sort of thing. It's still taking me a long time to fully grasp how to properly make. I think I've touched words. I think I've now, but it took a while to work out how to make a decent profit because nobody teaches you that, or they teach you it in two separate entities when you're in university, so you get taught the business side of things.
Or it's two separate classes, two separate degrees.
Yeah, because on the course that I did, they split us in the final year, so you did a more business aching sort of thing, but then you were funneled straight into industry as one of these behind the scenes people, which is fine, and some people really prefer that route, but it's not for everyone. But then if you didn't do that route, then you were funneled into this enormously creative, which I chose naturally because that's what I enjoy, but then you have to kind of learn so much of the necessities outside of what you're paying £27,000 to learn.
So about education, how there needs to be a big shift and have a much more STEAM, so it's like science, technology, engineering, maths and art, teaching all of those fundamentals of the world when you're vomited out. You all of a sudden you come out from your degree or your MA and you're like, I'm a business now. You look around and you're trying to read.
I think I learned
start with why.
Brilliant people that I now call friends and close business affiliates outside of university than I did in university. But the thing is, I wouldn't have been able to get to those people had I not gone to university. So it's kind of
that in itself is how it's set up. So it helps the universities. Universities are businesses at the end of the day, and then it's like, okay, well, if you get this special piece of paper that said I did this, then people start to talk to you. And
well, then again, people only talk to people that went to the right school, which is terrible. But and it annoys me so much. I mean, I know that this is all meant to be geared towards sustainability, but I've got a decent amount of notes to do it that I'm really I don't want to veer off.
This conversation, you can go anywhere. We can go anywhere you want to go.
Because the thing is also just to play on the word sustainability, it's how sustainable is it to be a desired climate and sustainability in a different context.
We have enough clothes, basically, so it's really it's. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think our I think the education system has been built on the premise, you touched on this exactly, that we have an apprenticeship model. It's an apprenticeship model. So you get some core skills, you take those skills and you go refine those skills depending on what your focus is, right? So if your focus is, I don't necessarily think from my understanding, I went to art school, so it's a little different, but I think it's sort of the same in that it's very old school. It's very like almost based on the classic, literally the classic.
Yeah,
This idea that you would go and work with other people, and then refine your skills more. This is what you're talking about, right?
Generally, that's an internship.
That's the idea, and I think you're right.
Internship.
But the thing is, I hate to say it, I'm not for unpaid internships, but I also understand that young brands that don't have any money rely on perhaps the use of friends, let's say it that way. But the thing is, we don't have, those support systems are gone. Like I was reading, I don't know, I'm sure you've all read the piece on Days magazine from by Daniel, I can't remember his last name, but he wrote...
Daniel Rogers.
Yes,
the
brilliant.
icon Daniel. I love the way
But he wrote a brilliant piece about where have all the working class designers gone. And in there it details that 37% of state school students now no longer choose a creative GCSE. And I think about this also because a lot of what I do is custom, and therefore a lot of what I do crosses over into disciplines, talking to people that do other things, so like musicians and artists and actors. And a lot of these people that we now claim to be brilliant or at the top of the charts or whatever they might be doing in their own field, come from working class backgrounds because they have a level of drive. You find a lot of successful people come from that because they have the drive to keep going. And those people wouldn't have got there without the certain things that were in place to help them. Like there's a musician Griff that I worked with a couple of times last year, styled by Cameron Rajput, and I remember her talking on her Instagram about the young pass for the TFL. They've now cut it, I think. It basically was like discounted travel. And I remember her talking on her social media about
student.
Yeah, it was like discounted, but I think they've cut it now. But like I remember her talking about how that she wouldn't have been able to travel to like sessions, to do writing sessions and things like that if she hadn't had that. But then there's also like myself, I wouldn't have been able to do unpaid internships had I not come from a low-income background and therefore been afforded it wasn't even grants at that point, it was a grant loan, but which is a loan, it's not a grant. But I mean...
I worked in 3 bars, I worked in the George and Dragon, literally just like pulling pints, and that was definitely my number one, the step into the industry from that point, because you had all of like that we now know the greats, like were in there.
I just want to introduce Rosie.
Hi.
She's the head of Resale at TikTok.
Hey. Oh, hello.
Nice to meet you. Hi, Rosie. Another great dress. Bye. Just trying to keep it cool.
Well, let's see. How can we bring Rosie up to speed? I feel like we covered a lot of ground there. I'm like, we're talking about sustainability. We're talking about digital fashion. We're talking about how the fashion education is changing and in need of change, and maybe not equipping some designers to adapt and deal with the current climate that we're dealing in now, how to be more sustainable. I don't know how much, I'm not convinced that the schools are really giving students enough information about how to become more sustainable. I feel like it's still quite focused on the kind of, the big bang, the kind of like,
I've seen quite a lot of interest in like partnerships.
Because there's money in it.
Yeah, but at least, and then it comes to like, it's like that one cell of using this said fabric because like that's the route to use. But I think, there should be some responsibility from those universities to introduce like a roadmap of like sustainable practices, with like the backbone of it being statistics, but like we were saying earlier, if the statistics and the understanding of sustainability and the whole fashion arena is the statistics are flat because there's no actual information, then where do you even start? Perhaps if everything just needs to go on the blockchain and be mapped, and then we can start from there.
But another piece of the circularity sort of side, you're very much in that space, which is resale, and then your background is Depop, which for me it was always kind of like, I just remember really rooting for Depop because it felt like it was like, yes, I mean, there needs to be a place where young people can buy and sell affordable, have this experience of crafting their wardrobe. I'm really
You
interested.
also launch a brand, like
Yeah.
that's where
and
the
that's what
TikTok
TikTok is all
aesthetic.
about, right? So it's like that authorship. So a lot of the folks around the table, I can't believe I just said folks. That's my American.
Thank you. Thank you.
Folks are from the Institute of Digital Fashion, and then lovely. Remind me your name again.
Joshua.
I'm sorry, Joshua.
Sorry, I ran in.
Jonathan.
Yeah, you ran in that gorgeous outfit.
Is a designer and works with circularity and sustainability. So that's kind of where, but I think that resale piece is also really important, right? It fits within that, almost that full kind of ecosystem of sustainability.
Absolutely. I think it's the most interesting space. Obviously, it's my background and it's my like personal passion, but I think we have all these amazing tools like Depop who, really champion, young people coming on, making their name, making their own brands. We have these platforms like TikTok who are now moving into these like resale spaces, which is great to see. So I think it's really great to have these. And I think actually what I find interesting is how much slower the big brands themselves have been in terms of like really buying into these. So I've spoken to brands over the years, but I feel not a lot has really come from them. I feel there's obviously certain brands, your Stella McCartney's, etc., who are really pushing that forward. But I think, I think we could be doing more.
Yeah, there was the Tommy Hilfiger Depop.
Right, exactly. But it's
Remember
like
that?
absolutely that was a fun party. It was a great collection. But I think it's really seeing that through within not just that one moment, but making it a part of their total
That goes to your
story.
point, what you were saying earlier about like the brands not letting go of that hierarchical system.
Which it's almost it's a culture clash a little bit because you have, I think a lot of the digital innovation is very much about open source technology. It might not always be like that. I think there's usually an arc where it kind of starts out that way and then it kind of becomes hyper the opposite of that. But for now, at least, that digital space feels very democratic. It feels very open. Or it is expensive necessarily. That's the education piece.
But we say we are solving that, by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't finish that. So watch this space. I was like, ooh, and then a platform.
But I think it's an interesting, because I don't know about you. I'd love to know how you guys you talked about how you had to kind of work a couple jobs to kind of find your way. I think very few people that I know who like fashion started out by being able to buy new designer clothes I was from California, so I went thrift store shopping, I went flea market shopping. I crafted things that I liked, and it was a really important way of developing my understanding about clothes. And I think if I'd skipped that, if I had just gone straight to, beautifully made kind of couture or whatever, that would have, I don't know, that piece would have missed. I wouldn't be the person I am. I certainly wouldn't love fashion the way that I do. So I'm interested as well in how, and I think that's one of the pieces that TikTok and Depop both do, in the sense that they give sort of a younger audience this ability to kind of craft their understanding and piece it together.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'd love to hear also from more of you and how you found yourself where you are.
Oh, okay. Wow, okay, big question. So I always was interested in fashion, and that was always my passion from a young age. And I was like, where I live, there's like this amazing area where you can go thrift shopping, and I had this like eBay business, and I was buying all for myself, and it was like always something I was super interested in. But I wanted to learn about like the wider industry, so I went straight into like kind of consulting, which sounds crazy when you're 21, but okay, sure.
You probably know more about it.
So I worked with loads of brands from like the top to the bottom, your Burberrys to your like Hunters and Capitons on all sorts of things. But then I wanted to focus more on e-com and sustainability piece. So I actually moved across to Zalando, which is in Berlin. I wanted to like get out of London and have this new experience, and that was amazing. And they are like,
they're doing great stuff in sustainability.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They're doing amazing stuff. I think for obviously, I don't know if you guys know, but like the other countries, especially in the EU, are so much further ahead of like UK consumers in terms of their approach towards sustainability, how they consume. In Berlin, like it's so serious, like it's really is a way of life. And that gave me like real insights into how you can weave that into kind of a big, multi-billion euro company, but they really are doing things that help their consumers to be more informed. Then I moved to Depop because I wanted to just like continue that kind of education piece and learn more about and how that was working. And I had an amazing time there, working in the US, Europe, trying to roll out Depop to more consumers. And obviously, like sustainability plays such a huge part in that. And it was super inspiring to meet all the creators and brands and people who were just hustling and making brands for themselves and who are now like, you know, big time, you know, got huge wholesale businesses or huge internet personalities or like really creating their own brands. Super inspiring. Then I moved to like an off-price kind of retailer, which was supposed to be like, you know, giving a second life to items that wouldn't otherwise be sold, which was super interesting as well to learn more about that side of the market and like what happens to the clothes that aren't sold, like what are the different options available. Then I moved into rental, so I've actually worked for
Just cover up the whole conversation.
Yeah, so rental was super interesting. It's a tough business model, I think, probably you've tried it.
I was going to say about rental's a really interesting one because I think that there's so many different models out there, and there's from obviously we're always community and makers first. A lot of the rental models that are out there currently are obviously buying the garment not directly from the brand and then renting it, so effectively all of that income stream has been removed from the said brand. And I know there's so much, there's like actual tears and furious people about this, like brands are just so...
There almost needs to be an IP that transfers, right? Like a copyright. I'm looking at you because I would imagine if I were a designer, on one hand, you'd be thinking...
I'm actually looking into... I haven't signed up to anything yet, but I've been asked by pretty much all of the main players in terms of rental, and I haven't yet. But it's not because I don't like them. I think they're brilliant in essence. But there are always questions that come up, and I never feel like I don't feel like at the times when I've had conversations with these places, I don't feel like I've ever had the right stock. And what I mean by that is a lot of this stuff is quite expensive. I'm now working on some stuff which is a bit more durable, and what I mean by that is something that can be thrown into the washing machine. Do you know what I mean?
Cleaning is the issue.
Cleaning it is like a real issue because these pieces need to be. I want every time it goes out it to look as expensive as it did when it was first made.
Yeah, because it's your brand.
It's my brand.
Positioning,
Exactly. I don't want it to look like a rag by the time it's been passed around. But equally want my clients to be able to enjoy it and look good wearing it. So I might have found a harmony now, which should be coming in the next few months. But one of the biggest players, which I won't name, but I'm sure you can Google, they kind of encouraged a seasonal way of working, which defeats the point, because then they still require brands to have new collections every season and perhaps resort and pre, because their clients want new all the time. Whereas realistically, a perfect rental system would be up to the designer how long those pieces stay on there. So instead of reinventing remaking basically the same piece in just a different tone or a different shade, you could keep that same piece on there for 2 years until no longer, do you know what I mean? You could, and then people would go, because also a lot of new designers now, they don't have too much variety in terms of what they make. They have a real clear focus in their silhouettes. So pushing these brands, especially these young new brands, to constantly be creating new silhouettes that are trend driven, because that's what it encourages. It almost pulls that brand away from its essential DNA, all for the sakes of that rental company making a profit. And then by the time you've worked with that rental company for quite a few years, if that's your sole or main income stream, then you've lost your brand DNA, and then what's going to keep people either renting, or what's even to an extent going to make people want to buy those pieces?
It almost like a royalty.
This is an equity share point.
This is
exactly where digital comes in.
Because that's probably not what they want to.
But I mean, I don't. That sounds very negative. I think that in principle, the idea of renting clothes is brilliant, but it's just there need to be things. Because I mean, there's also something called the blockchain, which basically have you talked about this earlier? So if you talked about it, I won't re-explain, but basically,
these guys know a lot about blockchain.
You can see where your garment has been, where it's been made, who's worn it, who bought it previously, and the idea would be that would last, because it's built in a digital essence. You could then, even if you found that garment 50 years from now in a charity shop, you could sort of scan it, the barcode or whatever it might be, and find out where.
Yeah, the digital.
where it lives.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
it. That's
But the thing is that, again, it's brilliant technology, but again, it's niche because it's partly because it's expensive, or partly because people are apprehensive, and there are all of these sides to it. I mean, I know it can be accessible, and I'm sure that.
I think that's it. It's just, we're just at the beginning of it, and I think that.
I don't think it's going to be niche that much longer.
No, I think
it's not. No,
it's because of the legislation happening in Europe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, it's the regulation that will unlock it. But what you were talking about, even also, yes, blockchain, 100% being able to see the life cycle of a garment from production to the very, very, hopefully not in the very long future of it, but also in terms of maybe compartmentalizing, segmenting your brand's DNA. We talk about this a lot in the possibility of opening up that archive and keeping an aspect of your brand that either through digital or using digital to experiment, because it is still different enough from the sort of main output of it. So you can then sort of enhance and add these new layers.
But I mean, like we were saying just a minute ago.
Introduce Astrid Pilla to the table. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Oh my God, amazing.
It's so funny, you pulled that.
Oh, is my name on that? Oh, there's my name! Oh my God! My name's on it!
Fantastic.
Oh, hi. Did you orchestrate that?
No.
Seriously, that's a serious.
Leanne is here. She needs to see it.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, no, we invited you. Yeah, we got you the ticket.
You got me the ticket?
Yeah.
And we met each other in London.
Yeah, we met Epic Games. Yeah. Look at that. Oh, so cute. Oh my God. That's Look. That's so cute. It's so nice to see you.
What's made?
So it's 3D
It's 3D printed out of nowhere.
Okay, that's brilliant.
So it's very flexible. It's kind of like this. I wore one as well, so you can touch it. Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. And we have it NFC chip, so it's a small chip on the sleeve, which right now pulls up the website, but it will contain the digital fashion pieces and everything.
Amazing.
So very sustainable.
This is perfectly timed because
I know.
How it all comes together.
talking about like digital fashion, but connecting to the real kind of world and how those things, and then how you can resale and rent them and wear them on TikTok, and all of that kind of how that all comes together. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about your work. Like, what is your process like when you're creating?
Absolutely. So I'm very excited to have met Sylvia Heisel, is the actual designer who has created these pieces, and I am on the digital fashion kind of, on the digital metaverse side. So we're really creating digital couture. So it's sustainable, it is made out of recycled material, and it's also recyclable. And they're made to order, so there's no waste, zero waste. And the fact that we're 2 female founders, so it's a great way to kind of give back, because the dress is made out of 300 names of women in Web3 and STEM. So we're honoring the women, just like Leanne
right there
as well. There's so many women. I mean, we're honoring all women, right, in Web3 and STEM, but right now 300 are on this piece, and there was actually a version 1 of this dress which had historical names of women in STEM and STEAM. And that was shown in the Faragamo Museum, and that was right before COVID, and that was a biodegradable material. So it was able to kind of fall into the earth, which it did. It no longer exists, but just the files exist, so it's kind of interesting. So this is really about bringing together couture pieces that are sustainable, teaching also the process of 3D printing, because it's such a cool technology to use for creating fashion. And then also a portion of so the idea for this particular gown is I hope that we will have an auction that will contain the digital pieces, the 3D files, and each of the women's names will be able to be created into, let's say, a necklace or jewelry 3D printed as well. There'll be a kind of extensions of everything.
It's going to be a Leanne range.
And the AR pieces, of course, as well. We're working with DressX, so we'll be creating the digital piece with DressX. And then once that is all finished, I hope to have an auction that will give a portion to, let's say, for Girls Who Code, or one of those groups that's going to promote promoting STEM education for girls, women and girls.
Amazing.
So that's the idea behind this piece, And then it has kind of branched out into other pieces. So this is also a piece made by Sylvia. It's also 3D printed, which has a bigger, NFC chip. We've kind of graduated to the smaller chips. But each piece is, very unique, and I think actually Krista Kim owns one of her pieces, which is totally by chance. She walked into a boutique, I think it was a couple of years ago, and it's a beautiful coat. It has a hood, it's gorgeous.
Oh my God, I've seen it. Yeah, because she reposted it, because Krista's on our board. And she's one of our 100 innovators. And I remember when it happened, I remember seeing it online, and it was like, oh my God, she's wearing it. It was by chance, wasn't it?
It was totally by chance,
She was like, oh my God.
I love the connection,
It's funny because just listening to you, that's so remarkable actually. I got chills and it's about 105 degrees. So that was but it seems like a common theme in this discussion is, even though we're talking about like IRL in real life and not above and connected to, but there is a real education piece, don't you think? Still, I think I hear you talking about education. You're talking about education. I think there's an understanding, I think, and you talked about your education at university and how maybe it was missing some pieces that you need now to kind of embrace where we are at the moment. But I think education is such an important piece. I think even consumers, I think TikTok has done a brilliant job educating without this kind of top-down, I feel like that's what it's done very, very well, is involving its audience in a way that makes it, I think it's like an idea generator. I think people are looking to TikTok to understand where things are moving. And I mean, I'd love to just hear a little bit more from you about how the kind of resale platform works within TikTok. I'm not sure I really understand it, so I'd love to hear more about it.
No, it's fine. So it's basically...
Educate me.
So I don't know if you've seen when you're scrolling on TikTok, you have like stuff that you could just buy it from directly within the app. So it's like TikTok Shop, TikTok made me buy it, and essentially that is a way for businesses from large or small to come in and sell their products. Obviously it's a marketplace which is fairly complex and takes quite a lot of governance, which is also something I learned at Depop. So until now it hasn't been able to support kind of used goods or anything secondhand because there just wasn't the kind of rules or framework around how to manage that, because it is a little bit more complex when it comes to kind of safety, legal, and making sure that's all. Anyway, so what I've been working on is just building that category out and making it possible for people to see, vintage that they love, for somebody to kind of upload their pieces and for that to be able to be bought on TikTok from directly within the app. And there's all the content that goes around that and all of the, collaboration with the creators and other brands that we've got getting involved. But yeah, we're starting out fairly small. But
so it's just so it's people, and so you're talking to brands, but right now it's just
so actually at the moment I'm working with mainly businesses. So I have various vintage businesses from kind of more high end to more mid-market, and I also have a couple of charities on board, which is super exciting because they have so much amazing inventory that they want to.
Have they already got clout on TikTok?
Some of them do, some of them not so much. So I've been working with the brands as well to try and make sure that they're
it's a specific language, isn't it? Because I think we hear a lot from real brands that they're just oh, and by the way, TikTok, how do you do it?
Yeah,
it's such a different vocabulary, and it's really it's not their space, and they find it really confusing.
I keep telling them just do it, just don't think about it, just do it. It's so different to Instagram. It's so different. If you think it's dumb, if you think it's stupid, if you think it's not polished, that's perfect. Just get it out there. Get your
That's exactly what TikTok audience want to see.
Exactly.
No filter, unadulterated content, just give us the truth.
Yeah, exactly. Joke. I always do a filter.
Like people say, like Instagram is your portfolio and TikTok is your personality of the brand, so you need to show us.
But you can still fake it. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah.
You can you see like people who like gritify. I'm like, I think you gritified yourself there a little bit. Like, is it? But yes, I think that's the aesthetic and that's the vibe. I think and even if there's an element of like staging it a little bit, I don't care because I still am interested in what people are putting out there and what people are putting forward. I think it's also, if you look at, globally, China is just so far ahead of us when it comes to selling off of social. Like, anybody can sell off their social platform. And it's just interesting because I wonder from the perspective, like, I wonder how long it will take us to get to that point from a consumer comfort level. Like, if you're just going to buy, see something, I love that top, I want to buy it. Where'd you get it? Can I get it from you? Can I buy it? Yes, I'll buy it. Like, when is that going to be?
Do we need that speed though? I don't think you need that speed because you compared. Sorry, because you're limited. Did you say China compares? Yeah, but then Tessa, I personally, and I respect your opinion, but I think that's terrible comparison because there's such poverty over there of people that line the streets. There are specific areas of a number of Asian countries that are far more developed than us in terms of technology, where the sole purpose is people rent like a cube space, like a few meters space, and it's meters of miles of tripods, just tripods and people sitting there and like you said, faking it for audiences to sell product. And I don't think we need to be in that space. I think TikTok is great in lots of different aspects and lots of, not just TikTok, but lots of social medias and new ways of selling. But like to become like that, I think that would be terrible. I think that would, because
I think it would, it would kind of be like what publishing and media, like the coffee table book or digital online, it will be like that. So you'll have.
Look at the music industry is great now because we have access to music, but now we have so much that's uploaded every single day because people thought that was great, and it is great to a degree. But now musicians don't make any money from their craft.
So much noise.
Yeah, there are some of the most successful musicians at present that make less than your average wage when it's all filtered down into their bank account. So I feel like if you push the resale market into a similar sort of digital model entirely, then it not only will increase the price of goods because people figure that they can put them on a comparable price to a new good or a new piece or established resale sites. I mean, you only have to look at the price of items on Depop and Vestia and all the what's it called? What's the other one? Vinted, that's the one. Not Vestia, Vestia's luxury, but Vinted, Depop. All of those, it's so expensive now to get a lot of things on there because people realise, I realised the value is a strange way to put it because these pieces were not loved, nobody wanted them to start with, and it's only because of trends that they are now expensive and inaffordable by most people. And then you go to charity shops, and I talked about this with Rayburn and a British Fashion Council.
It's hard to find fashion in vintage shops.
Yeah, but charity shops are terrible now because the quality of the clothing in there is Pretty Little Thing and Boohoo. And what charity shops do is they have a grading system, which most people don't know about, but it's a grading system of, and charities and organisations like that take in second-hand goods, they have a grading system, and I think it's like grade 3 or something like that, is stuff that they can't sell because it's so poorly made that they can't resell it because it won't hold up or hasn't held up by the points that they've received it. So they're instructed then to bin it or to incinerate it. And I mean, these are bags of clothing.
Which cost them as well.
Which cost them in terms of, but not even just in terms of getting it, but like to process it and all that sort of thing. So, and there are no really reusable goods in a lot of charity shops now, or charity shops are empty because they've been pillaged, and then all of the good quality items are now being resold for prices that are unachievable by a lot of people, unattainable rather, by a lot of people on resale sites. So then if you add in, to go back to what you were saying, that example of China and maybe we should be like them, I just think it's going to be a disaster waiting to happen. Do you know what I mean?
I don't necessarily think we should be like them. I think it's a very big difference.
Yeah, I know it's a suggestion,
But I think in a way, it's like, if you see that, you think that's brands are global, right? So they look at where things are going, that level of kind of direct to consumer. That's the part I think that's interesting in that piece. It's not so much, as you say, I think it's really interesting. That being said, fashion that was made in the 70s and 80s, like 100% polyester, like, oh my God. Like sometimes
shell suits.
But the thing is, those pieces were made really well. So now we don't. Yeah, some are bad, but they still. For example, like Chelsea Girl used to be like a high street shop before it was bought up by River Island, and you can still find old vintage Chelsea Girl pieces that still hold up the test of time, and they were high street pieces. They were designed for high street to be affordable, and they still hold up. I mean, you could compare them to now River Island because they own the IP for that brand, and the quality doesn't even compare. Yes, they were made of polyester, but they've lasted a really long time. Therefore, not only the cost per use, but the expense on the environment is far lesser because you have made that piece last far longer. So the raw materials that went into it, the oils or whatever it was that went into the plastic, it's not justified still in today's world because we now have plastics and we're consuming plastic. But like, exactly. But it's not even comparable in terms of the impact on the environment to what is pumped out of the high street today. I mean, a lot of my mum's and my grandparents' clothes, they were high street because they're not luxury goods, but they could be luxury goods because you put them next to a luxury garment now. So if I loan a piece from like a designer or a friend or something like that, it's almost the same. Like there's tailored jackets that they've got from high street stores, like the HS store. Do you know what I mean? And in like the 70s, 80s, some from my nan from like 60s, and they still hold up. They're beautifully made.
Yeah, they have a different construction.
It's just we've just lost the plot.
I think it also depends like what you're making things for, like what a brand's envisioning the end part of the cycle being. Is it that they're going to be recycled? Because if you're going to do that, then you need to make it with a very different set of materials. Is it that you want it to last forever? In which case, like maybe use a less sustainable material, but one that's going to last. So, and like, how many are you producing? How many are going to go to like landfill? It's like all of these questions, which are like, there's no one answer to having a more sustainable process. You need like people to just like think about what they're actually doing and what the aim is and how they're going to get there.
It's kind of like a lineage tick box where you know it's going to go and what products that it can use.
Some of that is, there is legislation that's coming out of Europe that's going to make it much, much harder for that to just be kind of a, nice to have. It's going to be business critical. And I think even for small businesses, frankly, because, you don't want to just sell, I love UK, I love Britain, but you don't just want to sell here, you want to be selling in Europe. And actually, interestingly, I think mainland Europe is leading the way in this space. I mean, I work with a lot of very big American brands, and in my past, in all the kind of innovative projects I've done, they've always led the way. Digital, they were way ahead. Everyone, But in this space, actually, Europe is far ahead in terms of both the legislation, the push to make brands accountable for, what are they doing, how are they producing, what materials are they using. And it's not, I don't think there's a silver bullet to your point, but I think even a degree of adjustment would make a very big difference at this point.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with you. I think the whole industry is so problematic. I think what is good now is TikTok obviously has issues, but if they're providing this kind of level of choice to customers and at least providing them with this kind of option to be able to shop more sustainably, which may not make a huge difference to the kind of overall footprint, but I think it's just like making these tiny movements, I think, to kind of
and also a new income stream as well for individuals, which is
definitely, and just I think
discoverability, because then you can if you can in my opinion of using TikTok, I think it's pretty good in terms of like funneling your audience to where you want them to.
So the algorithms are pretty strong.
Pretty good. I wish I knew how that worked.
AI bite dance.
I was going to say, I found something, it might have been on TikTok. It's a woman who actually takes clothing that is just needs to be recycled and makes bricks out of them. Like incredible furniture.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. It's been on my feed as well.
Does she put them in bardol? Does she put stuff in bardol?
It's like
There's also a girl. There's also a woman in South London that does it, and you can buy hair grips, and it's basically just like mass.
Amazing.
Mass compression.
Okay, guys.
We're gonna It was awesome.
I know we couldn't go.
We got a call.
Guests around.
Just arrive. Please stay.
Yeah.
We've been here since the wee hours of the morning.
Livia. Because you end up like following everyone and seeing who you know. When you're looking through people's stories and like getting invested in what they're doing, what they're crafting. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? When I'm like, for years. It's just really I know. Yeah, and like for years I remember like, which sounds terrible.
No one need know my name's Livia.
Exactly. Like, when you get up and look at that guy.
Literally like just no, it's fine. It's just like killing of degrees. Oh, maybe you need to give Leanne some wind, but then get like Leanne. Uh-oh. That's all right. Can we move out of the way?
Where would you like to place? There? Yeah. Thank you so much, John. I feel like I've scrolled down significantly. I know. Hello. I didn't catch your name. Astrid. I'm Joshua. Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. I've loved doing these sort of things. But your work is so cool. It's so cool. I'm in 3D printing. I would love to do it. It's so expensive to be able to. I mean, once you've got it, it's all done. But it costs so. Because I remember when I used to work for. I interned for Gareth Few for quite a few seasons, and they had this tech to do all that. I remember we would we and a couple of other brands would do bits and bobs here and there, and it would. I'd see it all form, and it's all just it's incredible. But you have to have a bunch of patience.
I worked with architects who made this gorgeous chair. But you need like a massive.
Yeah, because the whole it's scale, isn't it? So you can't really print too much of it.
Right.
Because most of the domestic that the ones that people get their hands on are like really big, aren't they? Yeah, so much to do with
That's
this.
what she made her the dress. So Sylvia Hazel, the designer, she has a 3D printer in her home, and she 3D printed everything.
Is yours a flat lay then, like a flat, like a big, large?
So, it's a small desktop printer.
Oh, okay. So what you do pieces all together and then mount it together?
So this is this one.
That's incredible.
This one might have been made on a different printer.
Sorry, I think it's
How it's like five, you know how it's like
It's meant to be like
got
that.
like these bits and it's kind of like fibers. I love that.
Them all together.
Right, yeah. I know. I was like, these guys look like they're in some sort of crew wearing black.
Welcome, you guys.
She 3D printed her label.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
This is Emmanuel.
I always have that.
Emmanuel.
How do I pronounce it? Lemeul. Yeah. So they're actually founder of Emmanuel and Dhanju.
Yeah, so I'm a fine artist, and then together we've got like a design brand that's focused on like sustainable fashion.
Oh yeah, okay, let's get into it, guys. Let's get into it. Yeah, you haven't heard a little bit of what we were talking about. We stayed live through that whole chaotic moment just a little bit ago. I was like,
But if you're still with us, or you're just joining, so yeah, we've been talking about sustainability, and it's obviously one of those things. I really like talking about this because there's no one kind of solution, right? So like, I'd be really interested to hear from you guys how you kind of think about sustainability in your practice, and we've kind of been talking about that, like the difficulties and the sort of how people are approaching that, and maybe we can start by you guys talking through how you approach it.
Yeah, no, sure. So I guess it started very like naively in terms of like using found material in our wardrobes, and then it's kind of just gradually grown. So like just growing up being like really frugal in terms of like thrifting, and then upcycling in terms of putting the artwork straight onto clothing. And then I think recently we worked on a project with Diesel where we were literally sifting through their trash. So I think that's been like the evolution in terms of how can we use any material and like clean it and kind of create it into an artwork. So waste is at a zero essentially.
So upcycling, like working with the brands to upcycle their dead stock, finished goods.
Trying to create like a circle economy.
Yeah. And do you sell it on your own site, or do you sell it on, where do you guys sort of, what's your outlet?
Yeah, so I guess we've, with the art angle, we recently did ACA Paris in October, and then we worked with a stockist in Mayfair called Yoski.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I guess, putting trash back into like fashion stores essentially, so it's kind of like that circle.
Trying to change like the stigma kind of thing.
Yeah. It's interesting that there's stigma, because if you think, so where you guys came in, perfect timing, by the way. And is your jacket your own design?
Yeah, so this is, believe it or not,
amazing.
Literally from landfill, diesel, plucked out.
Just makes you think, because I think when we talk about waste, it's like actually a lot of times it's perfect items that have never been worn. I don't think people realize when we're talking about waste, we're often talking about either material that's never been used, perfect material that's never been used, or finished product that just has never been worn. It's something I don't think people understand. But like if they see your jacket, they're like, oh yeah, I understand. But do you feel like this? So I think talking about the stigma, we were talking a little bit about that, weren't we? About kind of what the difficulties in kind of getting consumers to understand it. You're obviously kind of also focused on that and how you can educate consumers a bit about how do you kind of re-engage or engage with Second Life. I like to call it Second Life because it feels a little bit better than sort of resale. Because it's a little bit more than that, isn't it? It's more of you're adding your own touch to it, your own design process to it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, what would you say? I mean, I don't know how long you've been in your role. I don't think it's been that long.
It has interrupted as well. I want to introduce Jodi Mutahams into the table.
Oh, lovely.
lovely people.
Hasna is just joining us. We know each other very well. We work together. And she's just fresh off winning the LVMH Innovation Award. So she's back from Paris.
Congratulations.
Fresh from Paris.
So we were just talking about kind of sustainability and all of its different facets, I guess, is the best way to kind of summarize. And we're learning from these two about their brand and their business, which takes, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, okay? Take dead stock finished goods and upcycle, adding their kind of unique IP, artistic sort of design style. Is that, do you feel like I've added,
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I guess it's a duality, because I guess there is like a cut and sewn element, so some of it's like sort of fabric, offcuts that's kind of left from the cut and sewn process.
Yeah, great, amazing. Perfect. And Hasna works at Save Your Wardrobe, and their solution is around afterlife, so kind of engaging and like preserving what you buy so that it has a longer sort of lifespan, and also I guess from a business perspective, engaging the consumer after, like post-purchase.
Exactly.
Using a digital solution. So that's, obviously I work together, so I can really speak about that one. But where you guys came in, we were kind of talking about the challenges around kind of educating consumers, which in some ways seems weird because it wasn't that long ago that I think a lot of people did buy more from thrift. To your point earlier, like it's changed, like that whole, let's say, expectation that things should be new. I think that's a relatively new thing in the fashion industry. But it feels like the tide is turning, right? It feels like people are more open to wanting to buy Second Life, to want to buy items that have been upcycled. I know I'd love to hear from you guys what you think.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think a lot of it is to do with education. And just from where I am kind of in the market, like I've worked across the whole kind of fashion spectrum, but where I am now is probably more focused on the more accessible end. And I think it's really interesting how platforms like TikTok have really like exploded this whole piece around education, with obviously the thrift hauls, with this trend coming more towards the US, and you see like estate sale talk and like all this stuff, which is amazing. And I think a lot of people are still being introduced to this. And I think what's interesting as well is it's not only just from the more luxury end of which, designers really want their legacy to kind of keep going, and there's a lot of platforms kind of catered to that. But I think, even on the kind of lower end of the market, you might say, in the high street, I think there's a lot more education being done around it. Now, obviously, there's the whole conversation around greenwashing, which I'm sure we will get to, and I'm sure there's a lot of opinions on that. But I do think it's great that it's just becoming kind of more known in the market, and I still see articles being written in the Guardian about Depop, and it's like I can't believe that they're just explaining this concept like it's new. But
there's these articles though, they're the same article that's been published like 2 years ago,
right?
2 years ago again.
Right.
They just changed a few words,
right?
And put different writers
and they had like this time they had stuff about Vinted instead of before it would be about eBay, or then it would be about Depop.
Sites like that are now driven by clicks and not by organic information, therefore they know they can talk about the same thing which got a reaction before and get a reaction again. So we're kind of in this stale state where no one really is talking about anything new.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I feel last summer there was a huge movement around rental, which was kind of the new thing in sustainability, and now I think we're moving more towards talking again about Second Life, and I think that's really interesting. And I think TikTok, as I already said, plays a huge part in that. There's obviously still such a long way to go, but and I know you guys had a really interesting discussion earlier around the role of, fashion universities in that, and we've already talked about how Europe is really leading the way, and I think a big part of that is, consumers are, leading with their wallets, and I think they are changing their minds, but I think there's a huge part to play with the way that it's legislated, and I think we are slowly moving towards that.
The legislation needs to, I will say, it needs to have a tolerance for development, because I'm very interested in it. I think a lot of the proposed legislation is very interesting and overwhelmingly quite good.
Yeah.
But I do see how the more intense it becomes, the more of a chokehold it could hold over younger designers.
Yeah.
Because going back to what I think we mentioned right at the start when I walked in, that we were talking about how there's so much pressure on new brands, young designers, to get it right first time.
Yeah.
There's no room, you need to allow room for mistakes.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the young designers are going to make mistakes, and that's the only way they're going to learn. And we need to make sure that the legislation doesn't penalise them, as in that they perhaps set themselves up and state something trying to make a sustainable garment and sell that. Say they get one thing wrong unconsciously, they don't realise they've done it. We want to make sure that those new brands don't get fined to the point that they then have to close. Do you know what I mean? And I'm a bit worried that those sort of legislations, those sort of legislations might cause problems for the smaller sector, and it won't affect, and then it won't affect the larger sector because the larger sector will just absorb those costs
They have
in
lawyers.
fines. Yeah, exactly. But they absorb. I mean, a lot of big conglomerates are happy to make mistakes and do things wrong and just pay the fine because for them, the fine is far cheaper than the profit they would make from doing what they want in the first place.
Well, I would say though that the biggest,
no, it's great.
the
Yeah.
biggest
No,
brands,
it's like-
but the biggest brands that
Yeah.
I'd say, and I think we can say that those are in Europe. Those are mostly the big ones. There are some Americans for sure, and there's all over. But let's say the LVMH, the Kerings, the Richemonts, they're already there. They've all got plans. They've got contingency plans. They're very much aware of what's coming up next, and to your point, I'm aware of how little of that information is, I wouldn't say trickling down, but let's say is being communicated to smaller brands. I am concerned about it because I think even though some of the legislation around greenwashing is coming in not so much as, it's not legislation actually, it's like, it's almost like a very soft start. Yeah. But I think the idea is that eventually it will be probably legislation. And I know we've talked about this a lot, that it feels that there may need to be more of an education piece at some of the universities about how to future-proof your brand. In fact, this is where the topic of today really came from for me, is I think we need to have these conversations openly and understand maybe for those watching, what are some of the considerations that they need to start thinking about? I mean, I'd love to hear from you, just again, straight back from Paris.
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to sustainability, there are different views of it. The views of, on one hand, how things are made, by who, and it's very easy to call something sustainable if it has organic cotton, but when you look at organic cotton, you realize that it's not sustainable. So it's really easy to just say this has been made sustainably and then just talk about it on and on and on without trying to move forward from that and consider other ways and consider other ways that are not just sustainable, that are fair to the people who are doing regenerative techniques, things that are that puts everybody, all the stakeholders together. And when it comes to large groups and conglomerates, they have the means to do that. They also kind of have this facade of luxury, of beauty, of selling a dream that every time they launch a collection, they need to kind of like that race to, but at the same time, when they do something that is, and I've noticed it in the past, and I'm not just talking about LVMH, but I've seen others saying, we don't want to communicate about this because we don't know how this will grow and how we can sustain this in the future. So this part as well is where we as consumer and as people coming from outside, we don't see. And what I really loved, and this is not just to promote myself, but what I really loved by the message that LVMH is sending is that all of the other finalists were driving a better purchasing experience. We were the only one saying it's not about purchasing, it's not about something that you need to get from the new collection, it's just cherish what you have. And I think it sends a message to the whole industry that the future of fashion isn't just the same linear business model. It's something that isn't there yet, that we need to define together. And this approach, it's still kind of a work in progress, and we have to be a little bit open-minded on what is the future of fashion. And to me, sustainability and that word is there is so much we put in, and it doesn't mean anything anymore.
It's like so big that it almost doesn't do enough.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Too wide, too broad.
It's just too jumbled. So like for me, I try and break things down really simply, and like I get really hooked on a word. So my word for the past probably year or so has been desire. So like we're actually all in the business of creating desire, whether that's through marketing, communication, product, whatever it is. And it's this sort of like, what is desirable is the thing that we need to tackle. So is it about increasing how many items we have in our wardrobe? Is it about taking things from landfill and making that desirable, removing the stigma that we've just sort of said about? So if we can really like get down to the nuts of what is...
You're right, because it changes, right? It's not, it's if you look back at the history of fashion, it's not been the same throughout that time. You know, it was a period I still kind of get blown away by the fact that ready to wear, so the idea that you could go into a shop and buy clothes off of a hanger is really not that old. It's before that it was couture. I mean, people made their own clothes. I'm sure they bought some clothes, but that's a relatively new concept within the kind of human existence. Not to be too esoteric, but and that's where I think it's such a short period of time, but actually so much change, and the idea of what's desirable has changed a lot.
And for me, that's the big question. So, like, you know, I've worked across policy, like EPR and all sorts of things, and I kind of, another concept in my mind that I think about is like, what are we trying to deal with? Are we trying to deal with the leaves problem or the roots problem? So it's like, you know, yes, the legislation deals with issues that are happening that are, you know, out there already, but we need to create better practices, back to what you're saying about like keeping new designers up to date and things like that. So it's like the practice of the work and what the end goal of the desire is that we need to kind of like rejig about, because we've just been kind of fueled by producing more product, more money, more profit for companies, for gross national product, basically. Like, we're all just monkeys of like making money, basically. So it's, you know.
But I mean, I think I would say, as a counterbalance to that, because I agree with you, but I think if you go to a brand like an LVMH or Kering, or even a small brand, frankly, even more so for a small brand, and you say, look, this is a great solution, I have a great solution for you. It's going to reduce your dead stock waste, it's going to do all these great things for you, but you're going to be at a loss. He's not, I wouldn't if I were you. Even the bigger brands, it has to almost has to solve a problem that's happening right here, right now, but then also put brands on the right path to sort of a future, sort of like the new railroad, if you will, the new like logistics of how we're going to be sustainable in the future. So for me, I'm really interested in brands that do that. Like, it sounds like you guys all do that, actually, to some extent. And you're kind of creating pathways to kind of solve problems that are happening now. So therefore, you know, help brands either make money off of what's basically a liability sitting in piles that, you know, that they now can get fined for if they destroy it, and then producing something out of that is beautiful that they can sell. I don't know what your model is from a profit perspective, but still, it's going to be much better than having it sit there, become a liability, get fined for that. What are they going to do with that? They can't burn it. So if you're solving a problem for a brand that's now, but you're also making something out of it, that's new. That's where I think the future of this business is, in terms of...
And even collaboration. I mean, what you're doing is, I mean, you're upcycling and you're creating couture pieces that are like one-of-ones and they're original. And for a Louis Vuitton or other high-end brand, those pieces can still be incredible and desirable. And if we kind of change that narrative of, you know, how the public views those pieces, then we're solving an issue. And what you were saying, if we're changing the viewpoint of the brands and the public, then we're kind of creating a new vision of what is desirable. I love that. I love that.
I'm curious, it's a question for you two first, but do you find that when you, let's say you get an item that's like that jacket that you got from me, when you're fighting the stigma, how do you talk about it? How do you talk about it to, I guess, the partners that you work with on wholesale, but also how do you talk about it to your customers? How do you frame it?
I think it's this idea that so we exhibited at the Royal Exchange, so I think that's kind of been like the banner. So it's quite like it's an exchange with having like a symbiotic relationship with, I guess, the art as a concept, but also our environment, and like using the material so that I think the end user, so to speak, becomes part of this larger conversation. And I think there's a real like community kind of element, and I think there's like an excitement to like be educated on like the circular economy, or just like what happens to fabric and all of these kind of like, it's now within, I guess, the consuming process. So I think it now becomes, it's part of the entertainment instead of it, I guess, almost being fog that was kind of in the back. So I think that's what I'd say.
Creating an incentive for the consumer as well. So like Emmanuel said, like having them involved with the process, and because I think sometimes with fashion we can kind of, it feels a bit separate. So it's like brands are telling us something, but it's like but do we actually feel a part of the narrative? Because I think the DNA, I guess, of luxury fashion is inherently wasteful. So I guess we're trying to kind of rewrite that narrative and have everyone be involved with that. Because I think that makes it more long term.
You definitely build a loyal kind of consumer base that way. So they get to sort of help design the piece.
Yes, I guess the premium kind of idea is that you get to kind of like place the artwork and select them, and I guess fabric choices, and I guess I literally had a point off the back of that.
It's okay, we've got plenty of time.
Yeah,
I'll come back to you.
Yeah, no, my mind is.
No, but we were talking about the way they kind of have a say in how the design process works, and you were saying they get to kind of decide where the art is placed and kind of have that, and then they can buy that presumably, right? So they get to kind of buy something they've co-created with you.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Do you not find that your companies that you work with, though, they then? Because I talked to Helen. I remember Helen Kirkham talking about this. It might have been a panel, might have been a discussion. I can't remember. But she is a brilliant footwear designer, and I don't know if any of you know Helen Kirkham makes shoes out of mashed together shoes, basically, which is a really simplified, probably.
Mainly trainers, right?
Yeah, mainly trainers, but it's probably that's a really crude way of describing what she does. But it's brilliant. But the companies that she works with, I remember she said that a lot of these companies now give her so much because they see it as a means to an end, in that they just continue making as much waste as they did before, but they now no longer have to worry about it because they just give it to her and she sorts it out. And she had to have stern conversations about how she can't take on that much. Hello.
Branding creative consultant.
Lovely to have you. Yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah, I feel like I'm putting across a lot of negative.
I love it.
Yeah, they're count about it, but I mean, it's always good to have a count.
No, look, I think
none of the solutions
it's really important because otherwise we don't want this to be kind of like it's all fantastic and everything's great. Look, we're trying to have an honest discussion about problem areas. I mean, they're really
discussions
huge
about
problem
sustainability
areas.
though happen so much that then you get to a point where perhaps I now see a lot of negatives as opposed to positives. So some people are just discovering a lot of positive things.
Because it depends on where you are in the journey and also how granular you are, like how close you are to the ground. So if you're, like I feel that when I talk to brands, big ones or small ones, or medium ones, I'm always surprised at how little they know about what they've got in their storehouse. It's like there's the way not me, but the way businesses have been built, they're global. They have their stock in different parts of the world. They don't always know even what they have or how it's being dealt with or how it's cared for. There's almost an expiration process too, where dead stock that's perfectly good, but it gets to a certain point in its lifespan where the brands can't take that risk of producing something with it because it might have creases or it might be faded or it might be dusted. There's all these factors. So I think it's fascinating. I didn't know that before I started working in this space. I've worked for many, many years at Vogue and Net-a-Porter, so I've definitely been part of the problem and the solution. But I think it was a real eye-opener for me to see the scale of the problem. So I think it depends on where you are and what level of visibility you have. Hasna knows this too, because you sort of talk to brands and then they're like, they have this aha moment. They're like, oh, yeah, we've got a lot of that. There's also resistance to wanting to see it because then somebody's kind of like, they're worried they're going to get in trouble, or it's like, we don't want to own up to having all of that. And so we want to put on a really flashy new initiative that kind of takes the attention over here and then just not deal with that. So I see a lot of things so I think you're right to be cynical or be kind of critical. And
I think that helps to have this different perspective, to move and challenge and get people to look where it's really painful.
There are loads of brilliant initiatives going on, but you always got to consider how that could dampen. I mean, to talk about brands and the dead stock and being shameful about their TikTok, there's a brilliant TikToker in New York that goes around like dumpster diving. I can't remember for the life of me her handle, but she's got a large following on there. And I remember there was a handbag scandal. I can't remember what it was. I think I might have referenced it before. Where they slashed the handbags and they threw them, but they had a sustainability policy, or they were promoting something that was meant to be responsible.
Now they launched Coachtopia.
Yeah, that was at the same time, and
when you look a little bit,
and then the bins around the back are full of their old bags that have just been slashed apart, and it's like those bags could have. And to a degree, it's an archaic kind of like way of seeing it. But those, I get that they didn't want to just, I don't know, get.
No, I don't even know that they knew that was happening. I think you have to realize that there's a degree of detachment.
Because the companies are so large.
They're not based in the, they're not centralized, so they're all over the world. And I'm sure you guys have dealt with this when you're talking to brands about what kind of partnership that looks like. It's like, often it's a process for them of discovery, I would imagine. I mean, it certainly is for me when I work with them. So they're understanding what they have, maybe for the first time when a crisis like that happens. I don't know, I can't.
Yeah, disaster.
I'm not going to verify any conversations with them, but I can say that I think often it's like that's when they realize that they didn't know what was going on or they didn't know what the practices were. So I think that's one of the problems, actually.
The reason why is that they are so focused on selling and pushing new collections and pushing new things and having you desire what they have put, the latest thing that they've put in front of you, that they're kind of like don't care of whatever is happening in their own organization. And we shouldn't find excuses for them. We should say, you have a responsibility, you have a corporate responsibility, a social one, an environmental one. Coach is, and the group is big enough to get people to take, to hire people to.
I'd love to see them work with their dead stock.
Yeah.
If you're listening, that's what I'd like to see. Talk to these guys. I mean, there's a lot of people that I work with better. Julie Pellepas, they upcycle men's suits. So there's so many options now.
I would love to see more brands open their, like my friend Patrick McDowell works with a brand called Pinko and works with their archive, and I would love to see more brands do something like that where they take on a designer in residence for a specific set of seasons. I know it's not a long-term plan, but in terms of short-term, it deals with the archive pieces that they can then make a profit from because it's all in-house. And I mean, that's a brilliant way.
I think there's a lot of that going on, but I also think there's, not too long ago, I remember having conversations with bigger brands, and it was kind of like, well, even young designers, actually talking to some universities, and their feeling was like, well, the students don't want textiles that then everybody else can have. And so I think we have this old value system based on originality at all costs, like at all costs. I'm a big supporter of creativity and originality and having your voice, but I think that idea that somehow you can't use the same textiles, like, it really struck me. I was still at Vogue at the time when I talked to Gabrielle Hearst about, she wasn't at Chloe yet, and she was talking about how her biggest, what she does primarily is just look at what she's got and see if she can reuse that. It seemed so simple to me at the time. I remember being like, is that it? There's not more? And she was like, well, that's the first part, but that's actually a huge, huge improvement to then just, getting new textiles every, season, and then there's so many seasons, to your point, Hasna, right? There's so much newness.
And you can see that as well with younger designers or smaller businesses, that they actually have to do that from a financial point of view. It makes sense to, if you've got leftover stock, like see what you can do next season or even 2 seasons to give it a bit of distance.
It seems so commonplace.
Yeah.
It should be. It's not. But
I think going back to the coach piece, I feel like you're really kind of diplomatic, Emily. But I do think part of the problem is that these businesses don't empower everyone from the ground up. So yes, maybe you didn't know that practice was happening. However, if it was built into the value system of the business and every single person within the business, or not every person in the business, because I think we have to be realistic. Not everyone cares about the environment. Nobody is perfect as well in what area they care about. Some people are more driven by animal cruelty, some people are more environmental, some people more social. But if you have people within the business at different touch points, whether you have someone in retail who's an advocate, someone on board level who's an advocate, someone in the comms team, all of that is really, really important to make sure that things will still get missed, but you won't have situations like that, because I don't truly believe that they didn't know.
There's probably something set into their policies years and years ago. They forgot it even existed, and then it'd been carried on by employees and managers, and then eventually it surfaced on TikTok, and they thought, God, did we not erase that policy, or did we not? Maybe they didn't even consider that, but it was, like you say, it was lost in.
They are not the only ones. They are not the only ones, and I really don't think they did know. I think that's worse. Actually. I think it's worse that they didn't know, and I think the brands that I speak to, and I'd really love to hear from you guys, like how because you want to provide solutions, right? I don't want to get to a point, we started the conversation where you're saying, you're worried that, young, small brands will be so scared of making a mistake. You know what? The bigger brands are too. And they often will hide. I mean, I think some of the bigger French brands will almost prohibit people from talking about using the words because it's so, they don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to be caught out. So I think we're at this tipping point. I really do think we are. And God, I hope so. Let's tip it. Let's all just lean a little bit in. But we're at this tipping point where they will have to be aware of their policy. They won't have the option of either pretending or being blind. But I think what I noticed speaking to brands is just how little they know about how much stock they have, what the state of it is, what to do about it. It's all on paper spreadsheets often. And we're talking very big multinational Fortune 500 brands. It's shocking, right? I mean, how do you make them still feel okay about it, but sort of go like, okay?
I think I just remember the point I was going to make. I think we went to the luxury summit in last year, and I think a massive conversation was reimagining the concept of luxury, especially post-pandemic when it was life and death, and it's where does luxury kind of sit in our lives now? And I think well-being was something that really kind of kept coming to the forefront, and I think there's a real opportunity now with kind of grassroots initiatives where people are doing things based on with this financial parameters, and then you've got luxury brands where there's a real kind of opportunity for a synergy in terms of just the conversation of well-being is a luxury now when we think about what we all experienced. No one was exempt from what happened, and I think that there's a real now opportunity to reflect on resource as people, as a planet, and I think remove the blame game. I think a lot of brands do definitely kind of experience that, and I think just kind of being able to step into the middle, which is purely solution based. So I think even we experienced it, even working with Diesel's kind of raw materials. I think it was almost the assumption that we're going to be pointing fingers, but it was more so it was purely initiative based, and it was an amazing project. So I think from our standpoint, we just want to continue to kind of advocate for that to become an industry standard. But we understand, I guess there's entrenched in terms of the tradition of quality over at all costs, as you said.
I do think critique is important though, and I think that one thing for brands to also learn and understand is that the critique there's positivity within the critique. There are things to learn, things are brought to your attention, and rather than having this closed off approach, we live in a world now with social media where the dialogue is two ways, and we should take advantage of the fact that the dialogue is two ways. So if something is brought to our attention by a consumer, by an external party, by an expert, rather than feeling attacked, bring them in and have a conversation with them. Because yes, we can be kind, and obviously be kind, #be kind. We can be, I think we should always be as respectful as we possibly can, but with some of the walls that we're trying to break through, they do require a little bit of force, and that community impact that we often see with the coach piece of content on TikTok going viral everywhere. I can't even remember what their response was now when I think about it.
I think they put out a press statement, didn't they? And then they just pretended like it didn't happen, which is usually.
Well, there was a little more to it than that, but I think it certainly wasn't
a big fair.
I don't think. I mean, they did Coachtopia, which was their solution. I have my feelings about that, but I think.
But they didn't. What would have been really smart to do actually when launching Coachtopia is reference back to their mistakes, and I think brands don't want to bring things back to surface, and it's you should.
But the brands that let things die often do get away with it. I'm thinking of Dolce & Gabbana. I'm thinking of a lot of brands that they just ride it out. But I mean, I'm interested again. We keep coming back to this, so it's obviously a theme, but. I like to think about why are there these obstacles, and I often think it is kind of it's educational, but it's also cultural. I don't just mean cultural from there's that too, but I think it's cultural in terms of how the fashion industry has evolved, what the value system of the fashion industry is. What I tend to do in that space is I help sort of circular solutions understand the culture of the fashion industry, because I've worked in it so long, because often they're kind of going, they're like, I want to change it, but you don't actually understand it to start with. And I think we've talked about this a lot too, because like, Hasna, you were saying, like for you, I think the culture of like repairing your clothes, having that longevity, buying something that you're going to have forever, it's almost a value system we've lost touch with a little bit. So like and I think it's coming back around. Ooh, look, the sky agrees. It's just something that feels like it's coming back around, and it's more relevant now than it has been in the more recent past. I mean, I had to teach myself how to sew on a button. My grandmother would have known all of that, you know. My mom, not so much. So it's sort of it's like a lost art, right? Of like, how do we care?
I think it's really important as well when we sit together that we are kind of in a bubble and we all think alike, and we don't have that external vision or external upbringing from a whole other continent, country, or whatever, and that can sometimes feels like an alien in around the table. So I grew up in North Africa. So Africa isn't just one country. It's not just one face, one color. It's a beautiful continent, and I really want to emphasize about that, because usually we refer to Africa as this kind of where we put whatever we want to put in it. Like the poor are in Africa, the rich and tyrannic people are in Africa, whatever. But we have values of around resource valuation, because and in Tunisia and in where I come from, it doesn't rain that much. You have to be very mindful of the space you live in. You have to be very mindful of the food you grow and when it grows and so on. And when it comes to fashion, the issue with my country and also other countries in Africa is that we import discarded textiles, but we don't have the means to dispose of them. So they end up in our landfill. So when you look at local European landfills, you're like, wow, this is crazy. But most of it is sorted and disposed of in countries like mine. And there is a full kind of chain that distributes discarded textile based on how poor or rich a country is. And because of that resource kind of closeness to how finite resources are, there is a culture of care, there is a culture of repair, there is a culture of scarcity, and we have to think about it in a way that tomorrow isn't granted, and we need to build systems that are different, and we need to build systems from scratch. And as things evolve, we need to constantly question those systems and make sure that we are not doing mistakes, and we are not. And this is where I feel like when we sit together, we are all educated, we all know. It's a kind of a niche, but when you go outside of this niche, you discover a whole new world, and it's where repair and care and thinking about secondhand and thinking about buying things that are from like customized. There are people that do that craft of getting items, reconditioning them, and selling them after to others as something that they've inherited from a generation to another. So it's not just a TikTok trend. It's not just something that appeared overnight. Mm-hmm. TikTok may have made it more visible, but it's something that a lot of people have been learning and passing from a generation. And I feel that narrative is hidden, and we don't talk about it. So in our case, in our business, we put, and I think they are the real unsung heroes of fashion, the people who, just like you are upcycling, and I'm assuming that because you are probably a smaller brand, you do things by yourself and you are very hands-on. And this is where you need to also talk about your brand and talk about how you do it and get as much visibility as possible, because you are inspiring other generations to do the same. And it is businesses that are kind of at loss, because there isn't enough interested in manual things. Everybody are in digital space, but the beauty of craft is what we really need to focus on and get the spotlight on.
I think there's a challenge with the hyper-consumerism though. I don't know if that's been discussed yet, because it's only the more readily things are made available to us as convenience culture continues to grow, the more and more people are going to expect things cheaper and faster. And so the solution I haven't seen yet across the market is actually how we engage with consumers from a larger scale and actually try and change that behaviour. Because there are brands, I observed a panel the other day with one of the fastest growing fast fashion brands, and their mindset was, you need to meet the customer where they're at, the customer wants to shop, and so we have to give them what they want. And then they added some additional greenwash-y bits at the end. But there isn't I don't see brands even taking responsibility for I mean, obviously we have the example of Patagonia, don't buy this jacket, but obviously Patagonia has been outed in the last week for using the same factories as many fast fashion houses. But yeah, these brands aren't really driving that slower fashion mindset, the increased value system. I think we're seeing it with secondhand to a certain degree, but even secondhand, it's still driving mass consumerism, but with pre-worn, pre-loved clothing. So yeah.
I mean, there's a movement to I think Tiffany Darkis made it. She's a former journalist, she was on a panel with us not too long ago, where she's trying to encourage people to kind of just buy 5 things. It was like a movement, and I think it's actually smart because it does make you really think a little bit. Maybe in the past, I mean, frankly, it still is, but it would have been a kind of constraint of cost. Like, I can't afford more than X amount of things, so I'm going to buy things that are going to wear over my lifetime, that whole thing. And very few things are bought and actually worn over a lifetime now, right? So it's sort of, it's such a great investment. My husband, is like, that's not an investment, babe. That's a piece of clothing, right? So it's sort of like, no, it's not an investment. But it depends on how you look at it. And I think that you're right, but I think we have to start somewhere. I still think resale is way better and upcycling is way better and it does sort of chip away at the culture of new. Not that long ago, we had unapologetic high street enthusiasm across the board in this country, and I think that's changed. I think the high street brands, and I mean fast fashion when I say that, they are aware, they're feeling the pressure. I don't think they can go on like this without having really substantial change. I know for a fact a lot of them are working on that as we speak. They don't always broadcast what they're working on, it's sort of with extreme caution, but I think really wasn't that long ago that people were really enthusiastic about democratizing fashion. I think that's changed a lot, and I think part of that is, I think Depop had a big part to play in that. I think this idea that you can buy directly from the consumer, that changes sort of the value system a little bit. All of these things feel like they're going in the right direction. To your point, it still feels like, ultimately though, can it even be sustainable buying clothes in the first place?
Well, that's the thing. I think that, yes, we are seeing more people talk publicly about more circular behaviours. But I don't know, I often hear people talking about Gen Z and saying Gen Z are more sustainably minded, but actually I know, equally, I'm not going to name the names of the brands, but they are rising and growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, they're doing okay.
And yes, there are things happening behind the scenes, but I feel like a lot more of that stuff is because legally they're going to have no choice but to do it within the next 2 years with all the legislation that's coming in. I don't think that it's being swayed by consumers yet because they have enough consumers. There's one particular brand, which is the fastest growing, that is continually opening pop-up shops, even in locations where they haven't had that fast fashion high street ever, and they're having queues around the block. And so I think we have to be realistic when we're talking about the entire landscape. I don't want to be like negative Nancy, because there is amazing stuff happening, but for me the scariest part is, how do we try and curb that growth collectively, and hopefully the legislation that's coming in will have some impact, but equally we all know that our respective governments are driven by the economy, and any of these businesses that can help drive the economy will somehow still be able to grow. And then we add the social aspect as well of the factories and the treatment of workers of the factories. Again, we're seeing, I think that was the interesting thing with the Patagonia outing, was that you could see how much distance had been created between them and the actual factories that are actually making it, through second and third and fourth parties in between. And yeah, so I think there needs to be more done to try and really clear up and iron out these loopholes that brands are able to.
To go back to what you were saying, both saying about investment pieces, that conversation is rooted in class culture though, because I come from a single parent working class family, and while I look very nice today, this was kindly borrowed from the brand. But I still wear a lot of clothes that I used to have when I was a teen, because at some point I stopped growing and those pieces still fit me. So I still wear jeans from Topman that I've had about 10 years now. I still wear, because at that point I couldn't afford the luxury of thinking, is this brand a sustainable brand? I wasn't thinking about, I was thinking about necessity. So I have lots of basic tees from Primark, I have lots of basic jeans from Topman, and like I still use those t-shirts to go to the gym in, I still wear those Topman jeans. I still make them last, and that was a choice, and they broke in some places, so I fixed them. Do you know what I mean? I didn't have the option at times to say, oh, let's just throw it out and buy a new one. That's not a conversation, because it's either, do you know what I mean? If I buy a new one, that money has then been taken from something else that's needed, and why would I want to do that? And it's such we've got this disconnect, because a lot of people that spend a lot of money on new clothing, and then you have the argument of like Pretty Little Thing, but a lot of the people, the majority of, or the largest portion of consumers that buy from those places are buying hauls. They're spending hundreds of pounds on these. They're by no means working class or within that sector, because they're not considering, they're not buying one or two pieces, they're buying, and even if they are buying one or two pieces, they're then encouraged through shipping fees to spend 30 quid, 40 quid, which is then put on a buy now, pay later card that puts them in further debt. So it's like, it's a whole cycle, but it's all rooted in class culture, because if you ask people that genuinely, sustainability wasn't even a buzzword for them in terms of making their pieces last. They probably come from working class backgrounds because they did it out of necessity. Yeah. But I think then going on, because I've been listening to all of you and there's so many things that I've got to say, but like, I'll keep it short, but like the idea of where does the responsibility lie is such an important conversation. And while the responsibility does lie largely with the brand to produce the product, we've sort of come to this place in society where it's almost, you don't want to say, oh, it's the responsibility lies with the consumer, because then it's classist to say that. But I don't fully agree with that, because I think there needs to be a level of responsibility put upon the consumer, not to the point where you're making them feel like they have to buy things that are super expensive. If they can only afford from a high street retailer, then buy it but make it last. Do you know what I mean?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the imagery while you're talking.
It's a little disjointed. But these pieces will go back to our conversation about quality. All of these pieces will fall apart. You know, they won't last long. But it's about understanding.
And also, so many of their consumers also know that. Yeah. Like they're fine with it
because they buy it for like £5, and they don't want the responsibility of keeping it. They want to buy it on wear and then throw it away, or it disintegrate on their bodies.
Do you think? I like what you were saying about the Gen Z. There's this kind of paradox where, you know, you go and you know, feel like you should take the mic or the fan or whichever now should be speaking. But just this idea, we have this idea or this preconceived notion maybe, or brands do at least, that younger generations are more driven. I think they are. It's a bit like when you get asked if you go to the gym, you're like, yeah. But then when it comes to it, are you gonna maybe, you know, if the same question, I think if you ask a young person if they're driven by, or anybody, if they're driven by sustainability, they're probably going to say yes, because on some level, they would like to be, right? They would like to go to the gym, they would like to be driven by sustainability, but there are other factors in their lives that might be informing them. Some of that's economic, some of that's social, some of that's all kinds of things. And certainly we have this kind of heritage, or if that's the right word, this tradition of buying anytime, you know, buying new for an occasion, buying new for a holiday, buying new. I have kids, that's a whole other thing. They grow out of stuff and you're like, so there's this, we're just so used to that now. It's become this muscle reflex. But I do think things are changing, and I think a lot of it has to do with legislation, frankly, and then I do think consumer behavior, it's slow, and I wish it were faster, but I think where I see the most progress and where I'm most excited, or it's actually at the level where you guys are operating, where you're operating, where it's like you are influencing consumer behavior as you are, and so I don't really think this is going to be short haul. I mean, I think you're right. I think it's very tricky when you see brands saying, like Shein is a brand that, for example, on one hand, everybody has lots of opinions about that brand, myself included, but they've just signed up with a brand that I work with to use dead stock. Like, I think it's like a million meters of dead stock. They don't produce a lot of waste. I'm not a fan. I think like there's a whole question and a whole discussion there around social sustainability, which I don't think they're even close. But I think it's interesting that we're at this kind of tipping point, again, coming back to that. But I think a lot of the gravitational change or the influence is coming from smaller, nimble businesses that are testing out the model in new ways.
I think there is this real dichotomy, and I think it's so interesting to see how that's developed, because I worked at Depop a few years ago, and that was really driving change, and I think driving a change in consumer behaviour. And I think it was so interesting to see that. And now I'm seeing this emergence of a lot more fast fashion, and it does feel like they're trying to sort of bridge the two as well. Like Boohoo done rental collections, PLT have their own marketplace, Zara have their own marketplace. I do just think that, as you were saying, I think it's such an interesting point. Like the idea of actually, the fashion industry that we have isn't even that old, and I think we're just in this Zoom phase. And I hope it's just like baby steps and like small progress. And I hope that small consumer changes in legislation, when back in the day you had things like the Slavery Act, the Bribery Act, things like that, which have made such a huge change in the way we live our lives now, but it took a lot of time to kind of get there. And so what I'm hoping is that through these baby steps and through us being here and through, the younger generation who may, like you said, be very like price driven, but maybe as they get older, they'll try and see
reinvestment in education though, because
exactly.
we've seen so many funding cuts year on year through largely conservative government over the last 10 years or so to the creative sector. And we've entirely, there are some colleges that don't even do textiles anymore because they can't afford to run the course for 10 students. And therefore those 10 students that might have wanted to do it don't even get the choice. They have to choose something else and then hope that they can put together a portfolio to get into university. And that's across the country, south, north, it doesn't matter where it is, the cuts are affecting all of these institutions at an unprecedented rate. And these were, and granted, if you get to the 2000s, you'd already lost home economics. People don't do, like you said, sew a button. So people didn't even learn in school how to sew a button or fix a hem or something like that, which used to be commonplace because these were things that for everyday, day-to-day life essentials, basically, how to live your life. You need to know how to repair your clothes, really, in order to live and breathe and exist. That's a mainstay, but we lost that. But then that kind of craft was then shifted into doing textiles or some sort of art course, and then the funding for that has now been cut entirely. So it's like, where do these students or where does anyone learn how to do where do they look? Because I ask people all the time, I'm like, do you actually know what your clothes are made from that you're wearing right now? And I'm sure that, I'm not going to put the onus on anyone now, but I'm sure that there are a large portion of people, even if they're educated, they wouldn't know what it's made from, where it was made, how it was made. I mean, this morning when I learned this, I asked exactly what went into it, and I got a choice of different options, and I chose this one based on, this goes back to the conversation about where your ethics lie, animals or whether it's responsible production. So this is made from mulesing-free wool. Mulesing, if you don't know, is basically where they chop off the skin on the back of the sheep to avoid certain types of infection, because it's much cheaper to do it like that than, and I'm dumbing it down, but like that's basically what it is, than to treat the animal's skin. And I mean, it causes unfathomable amounts of harm to the animal, Exactly, but through a quick conversation with the brand, I was able to learn that. I was then able to learn it was made in Italy. But the same sort of conversations, or the same sort of knowledge, you can still find with your garments that you buy in a high street. It's printed on the tag, and if you don't know, you can get in touch with the customer service and say, hey, where is this made? Every time I source fabric, it's not necessarily printed on the roll or printed on some of the local independents that I go to, because it's important to support them. They don't have a clue where this stuff is made, but if I have a conversation with them, they can ring up their supplier, and within 10 minutes of them phoning their supplier and finding, I then know where that fabric was made, where that fabric was dyed. I recently did it for a custom, and it was like, because this wonderful independent near us, they're lovely people, but they're just doing it for a business, that they don't really know about where the full chain of the fabrics, because that's a newer thing for them. They're just a local independent. But I asked them, they phoned up their suppliers, and I was able to find out all of this information that I was then able to tell my client, because they then knew that what I'd made for them was responsibly made. And it's like all of these conversations could be happening. They're very simple, but we don't. It's not. It's that simple. The actual conversation is simple, but but people don't know how to instigate that conversation because it's not.
Either. Sometimes they don't know.
I mean, H&M have like some. I know they've started introducing, probably in somewhere like Sweden, they've started introducing, like these little provenance, and you can click on it and it tells you information about it. I'm not saying that's going to change the world, but I think, at least it's putting that.
I think it could. I mean, if you can look at a piece of clothing like you can you see the nutritional value on the back of a...
I really need to step in on this.
Yeah.
So I spent about 3 to 4 years.
Well, you don't need to raise your hand. You just go in.
I spent about 3 years researching how I could make this traffic light label and pass it through Parliament, right? So on food, we have a label. We know what we're eating. We know the ingredients. We know the percentage of fat and all that. I mean, fat is... If you look at that as an ingredient, could be good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Could be sourced from wherever. So then you get really granular. So let's do that for the fashion industry. Does it make a difference? So, 3 to 4 years later, spending thousands of pounds on researching this, doing lots of different... the idea was to have a tech platform, went through, floating at Parliament, all sorts of things. Everyone's like, yeah, this is cool. Then we did a user group study with a group of people, all individually, so not in a room, because if you get people in a room, they're all going to be like, yeah, I want it, or whatever. So they've got to be individually talked to about these things. Long and short, basically, yes, there's a bit of information, but it doesn't change what we do. So the biggest thing that does change what we do is by making it socially acceptable, making it desirable, making it kind of something that we want, because even if they're all red on the right and you want that donut, you're going to eat it in that moment. So we know that it's a consequence, and then it also builds in these weird things around like guilt, shame, all the other things that we feel when we're eating or consuming this donut, if you want to call it that, So it's kind of
the food comparison.
Yeah, well, it's quite simple. It's like, what you're eating, what you'd like to, even if you go to McDonald's, you've got a calorie count, you've got a, British beef, whatever you're doing, you kind of know where you're at. But that's hence why about 2 to 3 years ago, I came to the conclusion, I was like, I'm working in this leaf area. Like, I don't want to be working in the leaves area. I need to go right to the roots. I need to help people, make better clothes, whether that's through consultancy work and working with brands, or whether that is actually really coming back to ourselves and understanding terms around fashion addict. What is a fashion addict? We're desiring all this stuff and just getting it in us and getting it in our faces, and it's just that. Does that make us feel any better at the end of the day? No. What makes us feel better is community, co-creation, living, well-being, being healthy. What does a healthy fashion society look like? And if we can think about that rather than a tag that has proven people don't scan them, it's just, I kind of don't care. If I'm touching it, I'm done. I've decided if I like the colour, whatever, I just want that in my house, or I've already got to that purchasing point that I know I'm really invested in the brand. If that's Royal Doulton or it's H&M, I have a different narrative about why I want that in my house, So it's kind of I think labels are the way that legislation can come back in, and the way that we can say this is the proof, this is the data point, we can verify this, yes, we can now charge you X amount of money and you've got to pay your fines because that's the proof that you're not doing it. But does it change our behaviour? No, is the answer.
Yeah, I wonder if it is more on the resale side of things where those kind of things can be useful.
Information, I think, about storytelling is actually really interesting. And tracking its journey and sort of seeing who's had it before you. You know, like if I found out that Vivienne Westwood had touched that shirt, I'd like probably really want it more than if she hadn't, you know what I mean?
And that's where it can be recorded on the blockchain and it can
Yeah.
If you, I mean, I'm coming back to you because you obviously started when we were a very digital crew a couple hours back. You were talking about how each piece that you make is completely customized to the consumer that you're making it for. I don't know if you can. I'm not sure if we kind of went into that too much with this group, and maybe you could kind of tell them about your business.
Definitely. So the 3D meta dress is a 3D printed piece, and it's sitting over here on the mannequin. And each one of those names is hand-drawn, 3D printed, and then constructed into this one-of-one gown. And what's great about it is that not only is it made of sustainable material, but it can also be recycled, and also on the NFC chip. So we have a little chip which looks a little bit smaller than this. You can scan it, and then all the materials, the process of how it's made. I was going to say ingredients because we're talking about food. The ingredients, the materials, how it's made, where the materials are sourced from. All those things can be put and recorded permanently on the blockchain, and to what you were saying, it's true, when you see something, you want to buy it. Maybe it's that once all companies have to put that out there and it's public information, maybe at that point it will be more...
The consumer will be there.
Exactly. They'll be looking and watching.
Is anyone concerned about the label or the word sustainability at the moment? Just because it made me want to ask, what is the sustainable materials that you mentioned? So first of all, I'll ask that question and then I'll go back to my point.
So the material is actually a recycled tire material.
Wow.
So it's made from that, and the dress before that one was made of a biodegradable material. And I personally, Sylvia Heisel is the designer behind the pieces who actually made the gown. So if there's really intricate questions about materials, I can get those answers for you. But from what I understand, it's recycled tire material, kind of like when you have a sneakers, for example, as well. And then once I guess not, if you say you're sustainable, right? It's always to what degree are you sustainable, and that kind of trying as much as possible to be sustainable, I think is important. And so once those pieces are made, we can recycle them. We can, if we're sick of wearing this anymore, I can grind it down, I can make a new piece. And then the digital piece is also again, do I want to, on my Instagram, wear a digital version of this piece and make it a little bit like with wings, or have some makeup on, digital makeup with it, or, then you have a way to kind of make the piece interesting without having to go to the store and buy a new piece because you ran out of material to photograph for your IG or whatever it might be. But I think the sustainability piece of it is also in terms of education, like we were talking about. For your brand, I don't know if you've ever heard of the brand name Thread House. That is a sort of an upcycling brand that also goes out to the community and teaches how to sew, how to create the clothing, and taking those materials and creating the products. I think that's also an important piece of the sustainability.
Just to come back to your point about desirability and moment of decision, where if you like something, you will get it no matter what is the credential behind it.
You can justify anything.
Exactly.
Right, in your own mind.
Yes. And that's
I need that.
And that's where I think post-purchase experience is super important. If we can't, nobody thinks that, like you or me or any of us here, that I bought this 10 years ago, I still fit in it, I can keep it. It's that rationale is, but what if in that piece of QR code or link or whatever, you can tell the consumer how to keep it for longer, or how they can cherish it to transform it, or maybe get inspiration from an upcycling brand like yours, and get them, involve them in the creative process.
Yeah.
I think this part is kind of it's coming. I think it's really
It's definitely an opportunity, but I worry that customers. I mean, I'm really bad at this, and I work in the space in some degree. But reading care labels, like I've ruined a handful of knits because I've accidentally put it into a wash, and I think we've lost the habit of reading our care labels. How many people here actually check a care label?
All care labels have dry clean only.
Yes.
So whatever you do, it's dry clean only.
Or no, I've got the most brilliant friend, and I don't know where she learned all of this, but she's like, you don't need to dry clean that. You can do this with it. You just need a tiny bit of lemon. You can do it. I'm like, exactly.
And sometimes you don't even need to wash.
I now dry clean probably a fraction more than I used to. I think you're right, but I know what you're saying. It's almost like we just don't think long term. And I think this is one of the things that made me want to work with you, because I also think it is generational. You know, very, very likely, depending on your age, your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather would have known not only how to repair. I mean, obviously you were very inspired by your upbringing, but I think sometimes those, you were talking about, you know, it's defined almost by scarcity. My husband's Greek, like his mother, nothing goes to waste in that house. You know, clothes that then are just worn to threads become rags, and then rags get used for cleaning, and there's just no point in which something gets. I've never seen her throw something away. Even food cats get this and this. So it's just it's a mindset. I wonder if we're not moving that direction, because we saw the last big movement, right, in this country at least, was like make, do, and mend, right? So.
No, and just I wanted to come back to your point where how come education doesn't include repair and care. Education is just building profiles that will feed the economy for a purpose.
It didn't used to be. It didn't used to be.
No, it didn't used to be.
It sounds like an old soul, but do you know what I mean? It's just.
As the economy is kind of globalized and there's this race for scale, you need profiles, you need people that are kind of trained to be
the robot for the machine.
I do think there's an opportunity though, looking at the entire syllabus, like even just from you bringing it up, I'm like, it should be
But there's so
part
many,
of
but
the
also you
syllabus
don't learn
in science and
accounting.
geography.
This is not related to this conversation, but you don't learn accounting, you don't learn essential life skills. A lot of them you don't actually learn. You have to learn them when you're out in the wild. Do you know what I mean?
have to make space for these new profiles in the economy. Otherwise, they can become outcasts and left off.
The thing is, the schools and the colleges will say that they don't have a budget. I've worked with quite a few different tutors at different places where I've talked to them about, and it gets to a certain point of the year where their budget is just crazy, the limited budget that they have, and then they try and scrimp on their budget all the way through, and then if they have anything left over, they can't carry that through to the next year. They have to use up all their budget to prove to the board that budget is worth, they need that or more for the next year, so they end up spending it on things, that money could have been allocated throughout the year, but instead it's then allocated at the end of the year on sometimes supplies that do last, but they have these tutors that have to do mind games with where all this money is going, and it's like if that money was just properly distributed across the year into essential services and the course that is needed, then it's all backwards, but it's all rooted in change that happened 10 years ago.
I just wanted to add on, just even beyond studying, what will become of these new designers that have really high aspirations and probably put a lot of tuition on their studies. They will graduate potentially as really brilliant, but then the market will hit them and say, we don't have a job for you. You have to find another way to express your creativity. And that's where it's really heart-wrenching to see these people with dreams and aspiration and skill and talent that they've really worked hard on being crushed by we don't. I've been there, and some they probably regret it now, but they will say we don't need your profile. It's not something that we can capitalize on and milk and get a return on investment. That's a shame, and I think we need to review the whole system. And like I was mentioning earlier, this whole system of having to. This capitalist system that you have to serve a purpose, grow the economy at all costs. I mean, there is a lot of virtues about growing the economy, but not at all costs, and also in a sustainable and
maybe doing more than just growing the economy. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And
what were you going to say?
It's kind of like conversation of where that value lies and what we see value in. Like, I think if you have jewelry, like there's ways and information on how to clean your jewelry, make your jewelry last longer. But how do we kind of look at clothing as like jewelry or like a valuable item? And like you said, like having the information on how to make clothes last for longer, and making them potential heirlooms and like passing things down and just creating like a value proposition for the lifespan of the item.
What you have, not what you haven't got.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think on a solution base, if you kind of split it into like a B2B, you're going to be approaching existing brands based on their supply chain, and I guess on a B2C, it's influence, and it's what we see culturally in terms of what our favourite celebrity does or what our favourite kind of influencer, and I think it's kind of, I guess, dividing it into the way that business is conducted and, I guess just consumer behaviour.
Realistically, like when we're shopping, we don't care about the conversation in the boardroom. Like you said, like if you made your mind up about an item, you're going to buy it regardless. So I think sometimes when that line is blurred, it makes like a taboo kind of topic where brands are scared to, I guess, talk about or make a change in it because they're scared that the consumer's gonna like chastise them or call them out, and then the consumer's on the thing of like that's not up to standard or whatever. So it's like, how do we kind of, I guess you said, get back to the root and that kind of reprogram the DNA and kind of make it more like a positive thing, because I guess
I think there's an element of meeting people where they're at as well. So I think across the whole journey, that all of us here are on different stages in our journey, again have different focuses and different things that drive us, but there are, I feel like I'm just like throwing out my concerns on this table. That's why I challenge the phrase sustainability, because I just worry there are people who are there and willing and ready and want to be more mindful, and they're being met with a very binary term like a sustainable fabric. This fabric is incredible, sustainable, circular, but the additional storytelling piece is where the value really lies, whereas Zara can say I said I wouldn't mention brands today, would say that an item of clothing is made of recycled polyester, which is flooding the marketplace at the moment, which is a little bit terrifying. And so many consumers believe that is a sustainable option. So many consumers believe that vegan leather is a sustainable option. And there are brands who still today are talking about, by vegan leather, I mean...
plastic.
Yeah, plastic, exactly. And so I suppose that's maybe an opportunity as well, in that how do we tell these stories to consumers in a non-judgmental way, but there are people whose minds will be changed. I have the example of one of my friends always donates his clothes and always donated his clothes, and I said, did you know that oftentimes when you donate to a charity shop, that item actually doesn't get sold in the charity shop, it gets shipped off to the continent of Africa and will end up polluting the beaches. And I sent him an article about Kantamanto in Ghana, and from that moment he was like, oh my God. And so I pushed him into Resale as the only solution that we currently have in the UK that at least tries to guarantee that that item is going to go to another place, and if you want, you can donate that money to charity, and that is going to have more impact and less of a negative impact, we would hope. And then obviously hoping that the innovation that's coming with material recycling in the UK speeds up so that we can successfully drop our clothing into a clothing recycling facility and know that it's not going to be dumped. Because the same, I had to explain about the recycling facilities that, again, don't put your clothes in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, what you said is really made me think, because when we first started this journey, when I met Sylvia, she had already been 3D printing. But then I had a friend who was really heavily into the 17 sustainability, SDGs. And I thought, well, okay, so we don't only have to just hit one of those goals. We can hit, equality. We can hit gender equality. We can hit sustainability, of course, material. How do we produce the materials? And collaboration and education. And then so we've hit about 5 different sustainability goals. And I kind of like to think that we can, cover more maybe. But you're right. I mean, thinking about just one piece, okay, yes, you can call yourself sustainable, but what are you doing? What is your, what is the story behind your brand? Why are you creating a sustainable brand even? And what is that going to do for society, for your community, for, pushing the whole vision of what fashion can be to help your community? Yeah. So.
I think it's really interesting discussion because I work with brands that are very customer facing. Okay, so they're right out there. Save Your Wardrobe is customer facing, and also B2B. But I think there are brands I work with where there's like hardcore work being done, like just amazing work being done. But when we've talked to brands about it, it's not, coming back to your idea about the profile, it's not sexy enough for them. Mm-hmm. So it's like the idea of actually recycling, upcycling your dead stock textiles and waste and all the sort of materials that get, it's like they're like, yes, that is a problem, but there's almost this tear or pull between something that looks really great to consumers. So I think to your point about sustainability, it's such an overused term. So I've actually stopped using it. I tend to use circular because I think it has, Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done a lot of good work in this space because it's more realistic, frankly, I think, in the way that the fashion industry has been built, to think about circular models because that involves resale, that involves rental, that involves repair, that involves customization, so there's this sort of everything gets included, and I think sustainability has sort of become and offsetting all that stuff has become, in my opinion, is just not good enough. I think so. I'm personally super interested in that different point between circular and sustainability.
I have witnessed people, because I was like, oh, maybe we could say circular, but I've witnessed people, again, misusing circular and just saying, this brand's amazing, it's 100% circular, and not explaining the additional pieces.
I bet you asked them some questions.
I couldn't, because I didn't want to publicly embarrass her. But also, I ended up asking the designer, and then I didn't challenge the actual statement that had been made, but I concluded myself that it's not 100% circular.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the greenwashing, that too, but the greenwashing regulation is coming into place because, and for those who don't know what that is, it's I don't know if legislation is too strong of a word. Hasna, you can help me here.
Yeah, it's the extended.
Yeah.
Under
guide.
It's a guide. Yeah, it's effectively a guide. But the understand, I think the implicit understanding is it won't be a guide forever. It will just be like a soft launch, if you will, of this idea that if you're going to say that you're sustainable or circular, whichever you choose, you have to back that up with a third-party verification system. So I think on one hand, it sounds great, right? That will have implications for smaller brands. We'll have to get that verification process. But
also trust as well, because I mean, however many brands, H&M, I can't remember the name of the company last year that H&M was using for their carbon calculations.
Index.
And that was
I mean,
no young brand can afford to do that, and I mean, a lot of young brands are quite literally a few people. Like I think Bethany Williams might still, which is a pillar of sustainable brands. I think that they might still be like a handful of people still, even though it's branded as, because you need to do brilliant branding in order to sell your brand, but you can't. That doesn't mean you necessarily have the infrastructure for multiple people. A lot of stuff is subcontracted, so on your shop floor or in your studio, 1-2 people sometimes. And where are you gonna, when you're both working on new work, custom projects, whatever it might be, how are you going to siphon off the time for that person to then fill in forms? I mean, for example, I mean, it's brilliant, but also double-edged sword here. The new gen application form, they had, I think it was about 74 questions. Each question required 500 words. That is an enormous amount of time you have to put aside. And this was all to cover like social aspects, sustainability, how you treat people, how you treat your workers. And I mean, these are all heavy questions. And obviously you want the funding, you want and like you have, how are you going to put aside the amount of time? I talked to so many people about this and I was like, how are you doing? How are you putting aside? And I mean, some of them have got the luxury of having budget to be able to pay an employee to do it or someone to do it alongside them and type 4. But like, that's a lot of, that's more than you would put into a dissertation for studying.
That's something for the BFC, I think.
Oh no, the BFC do a great job of lots of people, but I'm just saying, but using that as an example of like how much the work goes into the infrastructure of words and meaning.
But I mean, the BFC needs to help young brands equip them for their
applications.
Yeah, and I do think actually with that, just knowing designers that have gone through that application process, especially because the sustainability questions, they were added in this season, this year.
I feel like they're there to trip you up.
But I think they feel like they are, and the form looks really extensive, but actually it's more so about writing the right amount of stuff than actually filling out those 500 words.
Oh yeah, no, I understand.
But I think that for designers, especially if you that hasn't been part of your training, so I think that again goes back to fashion education as well. They will see a form like that and be like, oh my god. So maybe that is a piece for the BFC to.
Also, I think the BFC is now, I might be wrong, but they're kind of two entities, but I see them as two entities, and you have the BFC and the Institute for Positive Fashion, which I now see as like a separate entity, and I think I've now worked more with the Institute of Positive Fashion than I have the BFC, so that I now associate them as almost like two separate houses, but obviously your application that they're going to see kind of goes through.
Well, they see this as a growing area.
Yeah, it is.
So the fact that they've created almost a subdivision or a separate division, I think, shows that there's this. But I think there's a little bit of like we have to watch the space a little bit and see how things evolve. But I think. God, is it like 150 degrees or something? I'm sorry if I keep kicking you. I'm just like, yeah, we're all feeling it right now today. Sorry, I just had to say that. But yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to say in terms of, because we were talking about regulations and it's crippling for certain sizes of brands because they, like you said, they need to fill forms, they need to invest in so many things to be compliant. And then the biggest ones will have the staff to find the loopholes and then find the way out of it, but still claiming we are compliant, but
it's mad, isn't it, actually?
Yeah, and at some point we can talk about regulation because it's reassuring to know that there is a big government that is watching what people are doing. But if there isn't a ground changing in the business and how those brands do business in a circular way, or we will see the same mistakes again and again. And as long as we rely on consumerism, and I feel like, again, I sound super anti-capitalist, maybe I am, but it's a model that was extremely relevant post-war, but then with the first crisis in the 70s, the first questions were arising. Then the second crisis, which came really close later on, and then the internet bubble sound like to which extent can we carry on this way?
It's a really good point. It's almost like maybe coming back to your point,
a model from
just depending on the consumer behavior to change industry, rather than actually
which direction is the change coming from? I mean, I think consumer behavior is important, obviously, because we're still in a consumerist
whether we consume
model.
first-hand, second-hand, thrifted or whatever, it's still consumerism. It's still something where you don't enjoy things that you buy, that you acquire. You don't cherish them. You don't even know how they were made, who they were them before, from which other continent they're
If you
coming
knew that
from.
information, you would treasure what you've got.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
We would all treasure our pieces far greater.
Yeah.
Some positive. Can I just mention some podcasts? I feel like I've spearheaded negative conversation with all my cynicism. Some good platforms to look at. So if you're interested in a brand and you're not sure how they rank sustainably, obviously take everything with a pinch of salt. But Good On You is a website which I'm sure some of you are, and you can search most large saleable or wholesale sort of brands, you can search on there, find information. Also, going back to the Institute of Positive Fashion, which I think are brilliant. I consulted for their first Centre for Sustainability Ecosystems. I think I'm getting the wording all wrong because it was a good year. But I consulted on the first report. They've now gone into stage 2 now, I think. But those reports are really heavy, but there's a lot of information in them which is easily digestible. And I think if you're lost, and you were saying about where is this information, sort of where do we find out and where do we learn, if you go onto the Institute of Positive Fashion, it's kind of all laid out there quite easily. Obviously, you do need to set aside a bit of time to read it, as you would do set aside time to read a book. Same sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? So your brain is slowly focused on that.
Thinking it's a priority probably is the start.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a plethora of good information. Also, obviously, there's Fashion Revolution and all of these really big conglomerates, which I'm sure we've all worked with in some sort of respect or know of. And I think we now, especially us in industry, we've got to a point where we take these places for granted. But for people that have no idea, I think they're still brilliant. They still are brilliant institutions that we can recommend to people that don't have a clue, really.
No, I think that's a really good shout. I mean, I feel like we've given the audience some good starting points, right? Yeah. We could stay here till 4 o'clock, but I think we might want to wrap down and I'd love to just thank you all for coming. It's been an absolutely brilliant conversation. I really appreciate all of you and all of the work you're doing to help raise awareness.
Thank you
so much for
Bringing
joining
us
us
together. Thank you.